Committee members, let's go ahead and get started. Well, I want to welcome you here this morning. We have some good discussion points that we're going to discuss here today on our agenda, and we're going to do things a little bit differently. We have a few people signed up for public comment, and the majority of those individuals are speaking to agenda item 1.3. 1.2 is an agenda item that I believe that we can have a brief discussion and motion on. And so if the public is okay, I'd like, what I'm attempting to do is take care of 1.2, and then we'll have public comment, and then we'll discuss 1.3, which is R277-631, student waivers of participation from aspects of school. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with agenda 1.2, agenda item 1.2. Before I do, please come up, staff, you're fine. Before I do, I just want to, again, welcome committee members, Member Wood, Member Lear, Member Carey here in person, and myself, Matt Hymas, here in person. And then we are going to be joined by Member Hart via Zoom. She's coming via Zoom. So it's just 4 of us for now. And then, Nessa, do you have Zoom? Will you just let us know when Molly gets here so we can recognize her? Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 1.2, R277-465, cardiopulmonary resuscitation in schools. We're going to ask Elise to kick us off here.
Absolutely. Elise Newey, policy advisor. So this is an amendment to an existing rule. It regards a program that has actually been in place for quite some time. It was just codified in 2022. So that ongoing funding was appropriated. And as a result, the board created this rule that outlines how the funds can be used. The amendment to this rule merely corrects an oversight that was made in the initial rule writing. In the original rule, LEAs were given several options for how they could use their $6 per student grant money, including contracting with a third party to provide training or sending an LEA staff member to training. However, it did not allow LEAs to use those funds to pay a stipend for an existing LEA staff member or employee who would be going above and beyond their typical duties to train students in CPR. So this amendment simply corrects that previous oversight, and Jody Parker is here with us to answer questions. Are there any questions?
Committee members, any questions? Okay.
I make a motion.
Member Wood, please.
Okay, I move that the committee approve R277-465 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-465 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, Jody. Great job. Okay, we're going to jump back to agenda item 1.1. This is public comment. Sometimes I have a statement for the public. Have a statement that I can read. Ultimately, we're going to ask that you keep it respectful, and that we because we have quite a handful, we have about 6 signed up. We're going to ask that you keep it to 2 minutes. And can I ask public comment as if they are here in person? We have a few online with us. If you're in person, if you can come up here and speak to us, that would be helpful. So we'll begin with Heidi Matthews, if she's available.
I am.
Perfect, Heidi, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the committee for this opportunity. I'm Heidi Matthews, representing the Park City School District. As many across the state, we've been awaiting guidance on the implementation of House Bill 348, that participation waiver amendments. We've been looking to prepare our educators over the summer for the fall about what they should anticipate. And, it's essential to clarify the aspects of school that students are and are not able to exempt. So we appreciate line 16 through 17 explaining what aspects of school do not contain these exemptions. We also appreciate the depth of definition of conscience, as it helps set the parameters of the exemptions that are to be sought for only deeply held beliefs. You speak to alternatives discussed beginning on line 35 for assignments. So, educators are well prepared to provide alternative requirements to meet the standards. This rule establishes workable options in conjunction with parents. And I know there was fear that the law could be applied by students to simply exempt themselves from a requirement that was maybe difficult or inconvenient, or that they didn't adequately prepare. So we appreciate the focus on maintaining standards and assuring that if a student does waive participation, that they must still demonstrate mastery of the content. And especially in line 46, 47, that the school may not reward or create or provide credit to students for work not completed with an appropriate alternative. That is absolutely essential to the integrity in our classrooms. And we urge this to remain when the rule is adopted. One quick question has to do with line 26, 27, where it states that if a student chooses to refrain from participation, that this teacher must promptly notify the parent about this choice. Looking for a little more guidance on what promptly means, as it could be interpreted to mean, call them immediately during class or right after class or within 24 hours. And we just want to make sure that the communications with parents are important, but that they don't place undue burdens on our educators that would disrupt the class. So thanks for considering that and for all the work that you do. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Heidi. Next, we'll have Laurel Fetzer. Laurel, are you here with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, good morning. I'm just offering a quick comment on the rule, trying to make a rule of HB 348. I don't think that it's important to make a rule on this bill. I think it's important to make rules that are consistent with this bill and to make sure that we allow kids, parents, and students to have a right of conscience and to be able to act on it. I'm grateful for all your work. The Law and Licensing Committee does, and all of the members of the USBE. But I just like to encourage you to maybe reconsider that we don't need a rule for HB 348. We just need to make sure that all the other rules that are written are consistent with this idea and language. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Laurel. Next up, we have Monica Wilbur online. Monica?
Hi, good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Super, thanks. I'm speaking this morning on the recently passed bill, HB 348, which amended State Code 53G10-205. This is a bill that protects students from being forced to participate in any aspect of school that violates their right of conscience and religious belief. I really love this bill. I think it's beautiful. It strengthens the constitutional protections that children and their parents already inherently possess. It appears that USB staff has drafted a rule, R277631, in an attempt to regulate how the provisions of HB 348 get implemented in schools. I did a bit of a double take after reading 631 because it doesn't almost even resemble the bill it's supposed to enact. Where HB 348 is clear as day about the rights of conscience and religious belief applying to any aspect of school, 631 is making multiple infringements on these rights by muddying the definition of which aspects of school apply to conscience and religious belief. So this rule draft also appears to permit penalties and discriminatory conduct towards students who refrain from engaging in aspects of school that abuse their deeply held beliefs. So this is legally problematic for the board. The board should not be writing rules that violate the provisions of the bills they are supposedly based on. And according to the board's own legal policy director, Ben Rasmussen, the board shouldn't even be in the business of writing rules that address constitutional issues. In 2019, Rasmussen told the Law and Licensing Committee that it's really not something that's the board's authority to create these requirements. Rasmussen went on to say that the rule the board had written for 53G 10205 in 1994 wasn't necessary to protect these rights because they're in other statutes and in the Constitution. And so for that reason, in consultation with the AGs, Rasmussen recommended that the board repeal R277105, which was the 2019 version of today's draft R277631. Because that rule was repealed by the full board for these reasons, there's no justification for the board to enact R277631. Thank you for your time. I sent you my comments with related links into your emails, so I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Monica. Next, we have Royce Van Tassel.
Good morning, Royce Van Tassel, Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. As we've already heard, there's been a lot of discussion around 631. My comments are actually quite limited. Subsection 7 in the rule talks about intent, and intent is really difficult to enforce. We think that this is what we intend, but it doesn't say you may do this, you shall do that. And so it introduces a degree of subjectivity into that. My recommendation would be one of two things there. I would say you can move that up into the authority and purposes section of the rule, and it fits rather nicely there. That's part of what that portion about all of your rules do. If you don't want to move it there, I think it would be clearer for the LEAs and for you as folks that will then eventually enforce this to say, let's just not have this intent. We know what may and shall means. What you should do is a different matter. So those would be my recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Royce. Yeah, just so the committee is aware, I think some of the public commenters are going to stick around in case we have questions during our conversation. If you can, yeah. Okay. Royce, don't go too far. That's what I'm hearing.
Stop that burning it.
Okay, okay. Next we have Jay Blaine. Good morning, Jay.
Morning. Jay Blaine with the Utah Education Association, and I'm going to be speaking about a different rule for just to change things up a little bit. I'm going to be speaking about,
Keep going.
I'm sorry, 277323, the educator evaluation rule. First of all, we appreciate your work on this rule. We know educator evaluation is a very important topic, and we have submitted some, we submitted some during the process, and we appreciate that the formative evaluation pieces were put into the rule. That change was very much appreciated. We also would support any efforts you put into your policy list for changes to have the summative evaluations done less frequently than once a year. The reason for that is there is not the administrative capacity in our system to do effective summative evaluations every year. That is not feasible right now in our system. And I think districts right now realize that, and they're not doing them right now. And we know that because of the audit. And the audit pointed that out. And it's not a matter of malfeasance by administration, it's a matter of capacity. And so we know what the state law says, and a change in policy there in state law would be a very good thing for administrators, educators, and students. But we're not saying there should not be an evaluation, but formative evaluations. And one thing I want to note in the legislative findings in the code around evaluation says the legislature finds that the effectiveness of public educators can be improved and enhanced by providing specific feedback and support for improvement through a systematic, fair, and competent, and now it says evaluation, annual evaluation and remediation of public educators whose performance is inadequate. So it would be very helpful to have a fair, competent evaluation and remediation of educators. Setting goals as part of the evaluation process by educators is a very important piece. Many years ago, as part of the, actually along with Superintendent Dixon at the time in Granite, of the design of their system. And part of that system, it was called the Professional Growth and Evaluation System, and part of that was setting goals by the educators and then having observations. And we were very, very much in favor of a system like that, which really looks like the system that is set up in 323. So we very much appreciate the efforts there. Sorry. The very last point I'd like to make is we would really appreciate a renewed emphasis with LEAs, anything the state board can do or the staff working with all of our stakeholders, the emphasis on the Joint Educator Evaluation Committee to work together. As any new system gets rolled out, it's very important that all stakeholders, administrators, educators, and parents be involved in this committee for a successful implementation of any new evaluation system. That is very important. It's contained in the state law as well. And the fact that many of those have gone dormant now, those would need to be revived and implemented to have a successful implementation of a new system.
Thank you, Jay.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Next, we have Joylyn Lincoln.
Hi, my name is Joylyn Lincoln, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools. And I wanted to comment on two rules. The first rule is 303, educator preparation programs. And I have just a couple concerns with that. The first one is in line 46. It talks about a mentor, means an educator with professional licensing with training to advise, coach, consult, and guide the development of a new educator. We're just concerned on training is pretty vague. Is that going to be training that the program develops? Is that training that's going to be from USBE? Are there guidelines on that training? Just leaving it at training is concerning to us on that one. The next one is in line 63. It says offer multiple opportunities for a candidate to demonstrate. I think it would be better if it said as needed opportunities. Some candidates are able to demonstrate it perfect the first time, and to spend time coming back and observing is difficult on a preparation program. And then line 70 and 71, it says a program prioritizes capacity to support candidates as reflected in staffing and institutional resources. I'm not sure what that means. Possibly it means my boss needs to give me 100% raise, but I'm not sure. Our office currently, almost 30% of our staff are focused on the Apple program. So is that capacity enough? I don't know that we want to put that in code that are in rule what that is. The other rule I wanted to address today was Rule 330. And in line 88, it says an LEA shall develop policies to support teachers. If you look at governance, the policies really should be procedures that are designed by the school leader or the superintendent. I just get nervous and we're asking boards to do that, as I've worked with training boards across the state. So I think that might be a procedure instead of a policy. And then in line 91, it says that an LEA shall develop professional learning experiences and professional learning plans for relicensure. I worry that by putting the plans for relicensure in the rule, then the LEA is taking the responsibility of the relicensing of an educator. And that should be the educator's priority and their responsibility. It is their license. And I've been told that's like a property right. So having the LEA develop the plan, what happens if the plan is not in sync with what the educator does, but the educator met the requirements. And then also, just as we're looking at evaluations and making sure that we respect our charter schools, many of the charter schools have in their charter agreement an evaluation system that was built in. Oftentimes they evaluate on their method, mission, and vision of their charter school, which is a contractual agreement with the state. And when we start to move their focus, the school becomes chasing too many things and not doing any of them well. So really allowing them to use their evaluation tools to support their mission, vision, of their school. And then the last one on line 117, classroom climate, creating academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions to support student-centered environments. As an evaluator, I have no idea how I would evaluate social and emotional conditions. Those are going to vary. And so I don't know what evidence I would need to provide to the state that could justify a student or a teacher's license on that. So just physical climate and academics you can look at, but social and emotional is really unique and dependent on the student and the day and the breakfast that they ate. Thank you.
Thank you, Joylyn. Okay, that concludes our public comment portion. We're going to now move to agenda item 1.3. This is R277-631, student waivers of participation from aspects of school. This is a new rule, and we're going to hear from Elise, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you so much. So you're probably a little bit aware of what is in this rule already. Just to kind of summarize. Yeah.
Are you speaking to draft 3?
Draft 3, yes. Yeah, so the most recent draft has been draft 3, and I'll tell you a little bit about that one. That is a staff prepared draft. When 348 came out, we put it on our list to create a rule about it. And so in that process, we consulted with many stakeholders to hear about their needs and their potential confusion points for the new legislation, 348. So over several months, we met with LEA administrators, superintendent, education lawyers, individuals, to get some feedback on what would be needed or desired to have in a rule. And that's where draft 3 comes from. So that is our attempt to ensure that students are protected under the law, that their constitutional rights are protected, but also address the practical implementation concerns of the stakeholders. As you might know or have heard, that some of the definitions and some of the structure of this new rule borrows from R277-105. And our reasoning for that was just to provide some continuity for those districts that still have a lot of policies on the books that have used those definitions. So they are able to maintain their procedures and just tweak them to make sure that they fit under 348. So with that, any questions?
Thank you. Questions from the committee? I can ask if we're not ready. I'm just curious. In one of the public comments, in one of the comments by Heidi Matthews, she mentioned the term promptly on line 27, among other things. There's probably going to be some good discussion here, but I did want to see if we could have, is there a reason that term is not defined?
Sure. Yes. So Elise Nui, policy advisor. So we went back and forth on this one from different conversations with different stakeholders, and ultimately we decided not to include it in this draft because LEA leaders had asked us not to, saying that they preferred to have the local control to decide what promptly meant in their specific instance.
Okay. So that was by design. So yeah, Member Lear.
Need to start paying attention to these microphones. I was one of those who had a question about promptly, but then I talked to several different LEA representatives. I'm sure they would say they're not speaking for the LEA, but just giving me some insight and some of the benefits of their thinking. And they were surprisingly to me not particularly worried about that. One of them said to me, well, I just assumed that it would be something like the end of the day. Most of them had not focused, the people I talked to had not focused on the concern I had is, what does a third grade teacher do when some child says, I want to wear a hat today, or I'm not going to sit by so-and-so, and does she promptly stop, check with the parent, and what does she do with the rest of her third grade class? And so that concerned me, but I think I was maybe overthinking it. And at least from, again, few LEAs I talked to, that was not their biggest concern. So I think it's a good move to not define it, but to leave it to an LEA, and some of them will have great big classes, and sometimes it would be a group of high school seniors that you could easily leave for a few minutes and send an email. Sometimes it'll be a first grade class where that wouldn't be feasible. So thanks for letting me just tell you what I thought about.
Some good points here. Member Carey?
Yeah, since we're talking about that particular provision, is there any reason why we don't outline how we want that notice to be promptly given? Like, wouldn't we want that to be in writing versus a phone call?
That's a great question. And that's one that we have had. And we spoke with many of these stakeholders about that exact thing. And again, it was for the majority of the stakeholders we heard from, they wanted that to be also a local control that they could write into their own LEA policy.
And when you say stakeholders, are they schools that we're talking to? Are we talking to parents? Who?
We talked to, how many groups? Superintendent's group, or you can answer that one.
Good morning, Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent Policy. After every year after the session, we have opportunities to do legislative reviews with multiple groups. So I personally have met with superintendents, charter directors, HR directors, a group of education law attorneys. So often people who either serve as in-house counsel for districts and charters, or outside contract services. We've received feedback. Now that's just me personally, but then also many staff throughout the agency have been contacted by, say, curriculum directors or principals, et cetera. And at one point, probably about a month or so ago, we sent out just kind of a shared doc amongst staff and just said, what kind of feedback are you hearing from different people, different groups? And collectively, we received feedback that way on what are some questions you're getting as LEA leaders, teachers, et cetera, will need help answering or providing guidance on. So those are the types of groups. So specifically, every month, the policy team, we meet with a group of superintendents and charter leaders just a couple of days before, just to hear if they have any feedback on rules, if they have clarification for us on how this might be interpreted by a district or a charter school. And so when we speak to some of the more specific recent feedback, it is that group of district superintendents and charter leaders.
And what was the basis for not including the writing when you speak to these groups? Is it an issue of time? Is it an issue of money? Is it an issue of legal liability? What are they saying the reason is for not putting this down in writing?
So and Elise, you might have heard a little differently, but I think it's because on a case-by-case basis, it might be that a call is more appropriate, where in another instance where maybe the student's accommodated and it's just an email notification, it was maybe not something that's...
Well, the student always has to be accommodated under the rule, right? So
absolutely.
It's not an issue of whether they're accommodated or not. It's automatic.
No, but correct. But like the difference would be if it's a 6-year-old versus a 16-year-old. If the 16-year-old's able to walk down to the library and do some other work, it's probably not something where the parent has to come and pick the student up. If it's something bigger or more, I don't know how to explain this, but the student might actually want to leave the school or have their parent come and get them. So it's a case by case basis is the way I would say it. And so the mode of communication might be very fact dependent, like the age of the student, the instance, the urgency might be much higher in some instances, and in other instances it might just be here we wanted to let you know this your student chose to not participate in this art project or whatever it is, and so your student went to the library and did homework or something. That might be an appropriate form of communication versus something that is immediate. And so I just think that as LEA leaders, what we heard is the type of communication, whether it's email, call, text, etc., versus the time will very much depend on the circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. To that point, as one who has attempted to get a hold of parents, and sometimes a phone call, you have to leave a message, and then you send an email, then you ask the student to remind. I mean, we're working with multiple individuals here with multiple schedules, so to define that would be problematic. I think it would cause more problems than to not define it. Member Lear?
Not to just keep beating this up, but I also think you've got the issue of divorced parents where and more there's joint custody where each parent believes that she should have the same notice about every issue in school as the other, and so then you've got 2 phone calls or 2 emails, and I know you certainly can send a group type thing, but I just think it complicates it, and I personally, well, and we'll get to this point, but I just assume leave it to LEAs. They know what works best for them, what's most effective. They know their communities. They know what liabilities they're willing to assume by not making it in writing versus it requiring it to be in writing. So I'm more comfortable with leaving it loose than I certainly wasn't in the beginning.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add that if we are going to take that approach, that it's best to leave it to the LEAs. I mean, isn't that what many of the public speakers were saying? That why are we even writing the rule? Maybe the best thing we can do is what Board Member Lear suggested, which is the LEAs probably are in the best position to address this matter. And now if we're going to pick and choose and say, well, on this, the LEA is better, but on this, they're not, I guess we can work through that on a case-by-case basis, but
so that's one of the discussion points that we need to have today, and that was brought up in public comment as well as mentioned. The question is, 1, do we need this rule? And 2, do we have other rules that would encompass this without creating a new rule? Can you speak to that, Steph? Angie, thank you.
Yes, I'd love to. So it's interesting, when I first saw HB 348, and after the session, I read the last subsection of HB 348. And as was mentioned today, or maybe many have seen, and I'll just highlight it there, it does say, in accordance with Administrative Rulemaking Act, the state board shall make rules consistent with this section. And honestly, until about a week or 2 ago, I thought this meant the state board shall make rules. And the reason why is always Utah code trumps board rule. So anytime a statute passes, the board must, change their rules or adhere to code. And if the legislature meant for this to just be, but to say, you need to provide rules in accordance with the statute. So does that mean that every single other law that doesn't have that, we don't have to? That we only need to ensure that our rules are consistent with the law when this provision is there? So I do believe, in fairness to everyone, attorneys could differ on the interpretation of this. And I think when I saw that the board shall make rules, instead of saying the board shall ensure that their already existing rules are consistent with this, I think that might have been clearer. But ultimately, as you know, because I said this many times, I think the State Board of Education has the authority to make that determination. So you all can make the determination about what the interpretation of that is. Previously, prior to 2 weeks ago, I would have said, no, you have to make rules. It says here, State Board shall make rules. But I think we've heard people who are making a different argument, and you also have your legal counsel who can weigh in on this. But the State Board of Education has very broad rulemaking authority in 53G 3401. And so I think you have that authority to make that determination, and staff will support whatever your decision is.
Thank you. We welcome Member Hart online with us, and I just saw Brian come up on screen. Brian, did you have a comment, or are you just joining? What?
Yeah, I'm just joining and reviewing the materials. Can you hear me okay, Chair?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. A couple of thoughts I have is, one, the board does have very broad authority, and we try to preserve as much of that authority as possible. We don't want to cede that authority away. Once it's gone, it's hard to get that back. I think that's 1.2 is it does seem that this bill does indicate the board make a rule. And so the board, of course, can make a policy decision to say, either we don't want to make a rule or we do, and here's the extent of our rule, and would consider input from certainly the maker of the bill, the sponsors, as well as stakeholders. I guess bottom line is, I'd say the board does have the authority to do that. That's kind of the key takeaway here. And then you all have to decide, how do you want to use that authority, if at all?
Thank you. Member Hart?
First, I'd like to apologize for being late. I had an unavoidable conflict. I also hate to jump in the middle of a conversation without having reviewed what was already said. But I did have, I felt after we received some feedback and some background on this issue, I just, this is a case where I think a rule muddies the water, quite frankly. I think that this is one that was intended to stand on its own, even though I hear the shall make a rule or whatever. There's just too many different possibilities that would be appropriate for an LEA, directions for them to go in for their own procedures. I think there are other tools we have at our disposal, making a recommended a toolkit, we could do a model policy. We don't have to have a rule for everything. And as somebody that often has to make this real, make this happen in a school, I often have to pull the rule and pull the policy or the statute. And then I have to figure out the middle ground, because some people will cite the code and other people will cite the rule. And when there's both, unless there has to be, I'm a minimalist. I don't think I think we do a disservice when we muddy the water on things. And I don't always think a rule is what is the type of guidance that is most helpful to an LEA. I have questions. I want to know if my LEA policy is appropriate, but the rule doesn't help me answer that question. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Molly.
When you're ready.
I think we'll go Member Lear, then Member Wood.
Oh, sorry, Leanne. I personally don't care if there's a rule. It's funny, just in this moment, I'm getting contrasting texts from various LEAs saying, yikes, we need a rule, we need guidance. And I'm getting another one that says, we don't need a rule for this. So I think it's a crapshoot. And why would we want to take on the Administrative Rules Committee over this issue if we don't know for certain that we're helping LEAs? That's why I would think that a rule would be in order. And if we don't think we are, then, or we're being told we're not, we can't have a vote because there's so many stakeholders, then I think we start without a rule and not pick that fight. As to Molly's points, which were really good to hear from a practitioner, but I'm not a fan of a model policy unless we're told to do it. I'm not a fan of toolkits. I'm not, because then those become de facto rules. As we heard Director Rasmussen quoted earlier, I mean, he was, trying to protect himself. But I think that we have to be really cautious in terms of putting things out there that are not through the official rulemaking process. And so I think either LEAs are on their own, or we do it through the rulemaking process where there's really clear provisions for input. So that's my preference. I think we could end this discussion right now and say, hey, good luck, you guys. And we like you, and your attorneys are great people.
While you hold the mic, I'm always willing to hear and entertain a motion.
Oh, well, Leanne's got some
Okay.
thoughts.
Member Wood, please.
I mean, she took many of the things that I wanted to say, because I'm inclined not to do a rule here. But I do, you have met with these stakeholders, you've heard the concerns. Are we leaving them in a bad position? And is it our role? I'm fairly new to this position. Understanding where are we required, or is it our role to provide that guidance at a state level? And if it's not our role here, then do we leave them floundering without it? It seems like one of the things that surprised me the most about putting this hat on is that suddenly you become either loved or hated based on whatever you do. And where is our role, from a state level? And if it's not our role here to do this, we let them go, but will they flounder? Will it come back to us to haunt us later on because we did nothing? And I don't know who can provide that guidance, but those are kind of my concerns at the same time.
I don't know if that's a rhetorical question.
Well, I don't know who has guidance on that,
I mean, well, can I?
Yes, Molly does.
I don't have any guidance, but to me, the line is, does a rule clarify and help guide an LEA in making a decision that is in line with the intent of the piece of code, whatever. And in this case, I think there's too many things that depend on the local community. I also think that just because we don't do a rule now, I think it's prudent to not do a rule if you're not sure. And then if the questions become very similar from LEAs, and it's clear that we have a pattern of issues that are around a part of the code, then we don't have to do the rule now. We can do the rule later. The other thing is, I don't think, and this is partially related, and then I'm going to make the motion, is we don't do enough. We could do more in the space of helping LEAs talk to one another about what's working and what's not. I don't think that we should ever leave an LEA floundering at all, but I also don't think that we want to put them in that chasm that might exist when you have code and you have rule. So I think there's different types of floundering. I also think LEAs are in the best position to help other LEAs. And this is something where I think they need procedures more than they need a rule. And we don't write procedures for districts or for LEAs. So with that, if there's no other comments, Chair, I'd be glad to make that motion.
Raise a comment.
Yeah, we do have.
Oh, sorry. I'm not.
Vice Chair Carey.
Go ahead.
And then just so you're aware, I did ask staff what it would look like to have a motion to, if we did not want the rule,
Uh-huh.
and the motion would be that there would be no motion or there would be no action taken.
Oh,
So
Okay.
just keep that in mind. If that was I'm not reading your mind. I'm just
no, I just,
letting committee members know.
I saw someone typing up the beginning of a motion, so I thought one had been written.
Okay, Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I just want to speak in support of what appears to be maybe an emerging consensus that maybe a rule is not necessary. And as I looked into the law, I mean, this is something where I think the legislature spoke with a pretty unified voice, right? It's my understanding that it passed the Senate unanimously with the Democrats and Republicans coming together. It passed the House with a supermajority. The governor signed it into law. And I think they absolutely want to send this message that religious beliefs and the right of conscience are paramount in the classroom, outside of the classroom. And I think as a board, we send a very powerful message to our schools and our LEAs when we say, we're not only going to trust you to determine whether you should email, text, or call a parent, but we're going to trust you with this awesome responsibility to determine conscience, which yogis and gurus and everyone else have been trying to do for thousands of years. We're going to trust you with that. You know your students best, you know your school best. So I would just like to speak in support of the motion that hasn't been made yet, that I think that this is the right direction to move.
Okay. Seeing no other lights or hands, will you turn your mic on?
Yeah, and I'll-
Member
and
Mayor,
I'm-
thank you.
And I will be, this will be brief. I'm just probably being the overprotective parent, and maybe that's not even the right phrase, but I am concerned for LEAs who, and Angie and I, as we talked about it, she was more concerned about, will they be sued? I'm not so concerned they'll be sued, but I want to say publicly, I hope that there will be a really good faith recognition by all policymakers that LEAs are trying to do the best they can, figure this out the best they can, so that there's not retribution, retaliation, dragging people up to administrative rules for dressing downs or dressings down, whatever, whichever. I really hope this will be a good faith mutual experience with this, because I was around when 105 was in place, and it actually worked very well. And there was a great respect for constitutional rights, but there was also great respect for the order that's needed in schools and the discipline that's needed in the sort of mutual respect back and forth between, I can say this, but I can't say it in that way. And I think the law also speaks to that, where you don't have complete constitutional freedom to do anything. It ends with someone's nose, as we like to say. So there's not carte blanche for doing anything that you feel is constitutionally protected. So I hope that mutuality and respect of running schools versus freedom to be your own person is there. And I know that's just philosophical, but thanks, and that's longer than I want to speak. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Lear. We've been joined by Superintendent Dixon. Please.
Oops, thank you. Well, when this item gets completed as a reward on National Donut Day, having waited 30 minutes in line at Banbury and they ran out of donuts, it was, for you to get through this item. So that's your reward. I think Board Member, thank you, first of all, Chair Hymas, for allowing me to speak. I've had a change of mind over the course of probably even the last 48 hours, thinking about listening to LEAs who say we want things defined. It's really hard when we don't know what this means, to a more open perspective of, if we box them in, it might be problematic with some of those definitions. So I just concur with what Board Member Lear said, that, and to alert you all that I think as a board, we'll probably get hotline calls. You'll get emails. You'll get calls of, a parent or a teacher didn't notify me quickly enough or didn't get my permission before giving this alternate assignment, or, hopefully it will be those kinds of things instead of my child was forced to do something they didn't want to do, but you may get some of those as well. I don't know. I would like to put a pin in the idea that implementing something like this without definitions for a school year and then sort of putting a placeholder to come back after the school year and gather that kind of information. How did this go? What did our schools encounter? Do we remain in this space of not writing a rule? Are there recommendations to Representative Acton of things we learn? I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for us to really pay attention to this in light of the intent of religious freedom that Board Member Carey talked about, and just study this. How is it going? Because I think Board Member Hart is right. Sometimes we, in order to help and support our LEAs, sometimes we unintentionally overregulate. So is there a way maybe to then just, I don't know, put that dot on a calendar and say, let's come back at the end of next year and really talk about this and see, do we need to adjust code or rule or leave it alone? How did it go? So I just wanted to put in that plug, noting the grace that you're all going to need to give yourselves and not maybe overreact every time you get an email, a text, a hotline call, if something comes to you, and just realize it's just growing pains and that space of trying to implement something that's new and maybe a little different for our schools. Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent. Before we get to Vice Chair Carey's comments, I want to put some options before the board or before the committee. And staff, correct me if I missed something here. We're always willing to entertain a motion to go in the direction of the committee. If there is no motion, then we can take no action and move to the next agenda item. And if there is no action, does that mean that staff could bring this back in a year? I mean, you're not limited to when staff can bring it back, or would a motion be in order to say we ask staff to collect data or information and then bring this back?
Yeah.
Deputy Stallings.
Yes, thank you. I think either if the committee would like a formal or a designated or a specific data collection and report back within a certain amount of time, I definitely think that motion is in order and could be received. But I'm also hearing from the committee a desire, and board members and Superintendent Dixon mentioned, let's see how this goes and then reassess if we need a rule at a later date. If for some reason staff before the next year said, we're getting all this feedback, we could share that with board leadership, then they could make the determination to say, yes, we support you bringing this back to committee, or you as well, Chair Hymas, if you get enough feedback from people that say, hey, we'd really like you to discuss this again, we could do that before. So at this point, I would say your options are to just, if nobody says anything or nobody wants to make a motion, then you would just move to the next item. Somebody could make a motion to say, I move that we move to the next item to make it official, close. Or 3, a motion that directs staff to collect information and then come back to the committee within 6 to 12 months or something. I think all those are great options.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, to that point though, I think it's important that I want to see this implemented. And I think by not doing anything, it's almost, we're not taking a position on it. And I don't think that's right. I think that if we're expecting our LEAs and schools to create policy and procedures, that it's essential for this board to send the message that we understand some of the difficulties, but we think it's this important for religious freedom and religious beliefs and conscience to take that stand. So I'd like to see a motion, and Angie, if you could help me draft this, it would be to pass this along to the full board. And I don't know if we just do a motion of support for the code or the law, but also add that provision that you said, which is staff will actively monitor how this progresses and the feedback, positive and negative, and report back to this committee in a year the results of that active listening. And look, I think we all recognize that there's going to be, as Superintendent Dixon said, a lot of feedback on this. But I also believe we can't let the perfect, be the enemy of the good. And I do think a lot of good will come from this. So
Member Lear, while this is being typed up, Member or Vice Chair Carey, will you keep an eye on that? And Member Lear?
I would rather just move to the next item. I personally don't want to elevate this to any grand stance of this is going to be actively monitored when we don't actively monitor educator evaluations or anything else. I think it should be in the course of things. I would like an update in a year. I think that would be great. I've also received some texts about it would be helpful. One of the things I received a text about is I don't want this to fall on the back of teachers. That's my great prime directive about this. I'm not worried about LEAs being sued, but I don't want to have UPAC investigations about teachers who, because they are dealing with this for the first time, make missteps. And maybe that suggests that UPAC could do some training on this that would help LEAs, help teachers, but Ben can always add the disclaimer that, don't quote me. I'm not speaking as some great, fountain of wisdom. I'm just providing teacher training. And that I would support because I want to protect teachers. Of course, I want students and families to have their rights of conscience and religious beliefs, but they're not in danger of being investigated and losing their jobs. So that's my greatest concern. So I would like to move to the next item with the suggestion to staff, and I would make it as a suggestion because it's SID staff, not ours, that they provide training to LEAs and teachers primarily.
Thank you, Member Lear. My personal preference is to take no action, but we do have a potential motion from Vice Chair Carey. Vice Chair Carey, is this the direction that you were looking towards?
yes.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee directs staff to collect feedback and data on LEA implementation of updated section 53G 10205 and report back to the committee with the requested information in a year. Any discussion to that motion?
I'm fine with that because it doesn't say anything about monitoring or punishing or anything like that. Molly had a comment.
Molly, go ahead.
I'm just looking at it from an LEA perspective. I just want to move on to the next item. I have full confidence. I know those meetings exist. There's communication between USBE and LEAs. I know that if there's a problem, the staff, they're going to hear about it. I don't think if we make this motion, we are creating paperwork. We're creating a survey. We're creating a data trail when they're going to have the information because LEAs are going to be asking and reporting out. I believe in the channels that we have already established. I believe it'll come through the Principal Association, the Superintendent's Association, the Board Association. It'll come through LEAs to staff. I don't think that we need to make this motion. I think we're able to move on to the next item.
As the maker of the motion,
Vice Chair Carey, go ahead.
nowhere in the actual code does it say LEA. It always refers to school or schools. Is that a substantive difference where we have LEA instead of school?
Director Stallings?
Yeah.
Or
I was,
Superintendent Stallings,
Yes,
sorry.
thank you. Generally, the state board provides directives and monitors LEAs. So that's generally been the practice. We don't, for example, when we monitor, you generally don't go and monitor the school or reach out that way. But we can update that to school if you would prefer. Because it will, like you said, if the statute directs schools, the information we'll be receiving will be about the school implementation. We would likely collect that from the district or charter school leaders. At times, as you can imagine, we've received feedback that when we reach out to 1,100 principals and they're like, I cannot believe somebody from the state board's reaching out to me. It's just not our general protocol, and it sometimes creates angst or anxiety. And so generally our communication, our directives go to that either district or charter leader level. But I think we could put school here and it wouldn't be a problem because it will be about the school's implementation, but then we might receive that information from LEA leaders.
Well, I'm trying to address a board member Hart's concern. And if I could ask board member Hart, if we tweaked it to say that we collect this feedback through existing channels, we collect it through, because I agree, I certainly don't want to create a new survey, impose any additional requirements, but I do think that this is it has the potential to really change things for the better and sometimes the worse. So I just want to make sure that we are getting this feedback.
And Chair, if you don't mind, I'd love to respond.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. And I'm at an advantage because I'm in the system. So I know what type of communication already occurs. And so I definitely see that I have an advantage because I have confidence in it because I participate in it. And that's just a different perspective. I hear exactly what you're saying, and I agree 100%, but there is no way an LEA is going to be silent if they have issues with this. And I have full confidence that it will not be swept under the rug, minimized. It's something they're watching very closely. It's something that they'll call their like colleagues. A charter will call another charter. A large district will call another large district. I just have confidence in that. One thing we could do is that might make it a little easier is just say, staff report back on the LEA experiences that have been reported to USVE. I don't want there to be, if we started that kind of reporting mechanism, we'd be collecting hundreds of pieces of their data. There's so much back and forth that occurs in the monthly meetings and the quarterly meetings and the association meetings, and it just isn't necessarily formalized in this way. So we could just say, let us know in a year so that we have a time, we put a pin in it. But I don't think we should say anything more than that, because I do know, in my perspective, it's going to happen naturally. And I do have that confidence.
Just a point of parliamentary procedure. Am I allowed to accept that as a friendly amendment as it's been seconded?
Well, I guess the question would be, there is no second in committee necessary, but
Well, Leanne fooled me then because
I guess the question would be, since these
I liked your idea.
are in place, not only are the LEAs going to reach out to staff, but we're going to see any parent concerns come through audit committee, right? And so we have both sides kind of covered here. that are going to reach out. So do we need, I go back to the question of, do we need to take action here? And that's where I am. I would speak against the motion just to say, I don't think we need any action.
I have a substitute motion.
Go ahead. Well, Member Wood has had her light on. If you don't mind,
Sorry.
please, Member Wood. She would just let you make it and she wouldn't say a thing. I know.
No, my intent was to change Carrie's to a monitor as opposed to collect feedback, but the wording from Member Hart or Vice Chair Hart makes that unnecessary, so.
Member Lear.
I would move that we go to the next item. A substitute motion.
A substitute motion is on the floor that the committee move to the next agenda item. Any discussion of that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any opposed? That passes 3-2. Thank you. Next on the agenda, this is item 1.4, R277-494, Charter Online, Home and Private School Student Participation in Extracurricular or Co-curricular School Activities. And we'll turn it over to Ben to cue us up.
1 second.
You earned your rewards.
Take over.
Oh, good. I was going to ask you when you just said it. We heard her.
Is that why the sub motion came at that time?
Yes.
Carol said.
I thought I should get 2 donuts for pleasing the teacher.
Molly Carol will get one for you.
Yeah.
She'll take.
Oh. I had too much of that stuff last night, that cinnamon stuff.
Okay. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with the committee this morning. Terry, if you want to come up and sit in case they have questions, that would be great too. Our next agenda item is R277-494. The amendments to this rule come about as a result of HB 209 from the legislative session. This deals with participation in extracurricular and co-curricular activities by a number of students. The bill makes some changes to when this is appropriate and what the requirements are. And so we wanted to make a few changes to the rule that would just be conforming to those legislative changes. They're not super substantive, but we're happy to answer any questions you have about them. Mostly we're just updating terminology and updating some references in the rule, adding a definition consistent with the statute, and some requirements on participation. So we'd be happy to answer any questions you have on this rule. Chair.
Member Lear.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was
One of the, I'm seeing no lights, just a quick comment. One of the things that I had some questions on was the term association, which there's multiple associations in the state of Utah that various schools use. And we've been in that discussion, and correct me if I misunderstood Director Rasmussen, so I don't quote you. The association referred to here primarily focuses on the UHSAA.
Yes.
And so any kind of other association that a school might participate in would still fall under that umbrella of the UHSAA?
Let's ask Terry to take that.
Thank you.
Good morning, Terry Davis, Physical Education Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. In the 53G-71101, it doesn't explain out the Utah High School Activities Association. It gives different explanations, but it doesn't have anywhere in code or in board rule, specifically the Utah High School Activities Association.
Okay. Thank you. Committee members, I don't see any lights, which means I probably don't see any concern. And donuts may have been well timed, but
Just
member
just-
Wood.
Just a simple question on line 21. It says where we've added in private school, is another public school an appropriate addition? Because a public school is not a private school is not a public school. So should it say another school or
Another public school would not, my recollection is other public schools are not covered by the scope of the statutes. There are specific statutes that deal with the school types that we've listed, and that's why we listed the ones that were all covered by statute. But I don't think that these provisions really apply if you're in a public school, another public school, because they generally have those extracurriculars and
Okay, so it
you
didn't.
don't run into the same issues.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, I will offer a motion, if that's okay with the committee. I move that the committee approves R277-494 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Seeing no discussion to this motion, committee, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Thank you. Next item, 1.5, this is R277-700, Section 6, the elementary and secondary school general core. And again, we're going to be queued up by Director Rasmussen.
All right, thank you. This proposal comes as a result of HB 475, which was a bill which it attempts to modify the language arts credits available. You have two drafts here. You have draft 1, which is what staff has originally proposed, which was essentially in a verbatim what the bill says, and you'll see the language on line 33 on your screen that it allows a student to receive up to a half credit of their language arts credits for a course or school-sponsored activity emphasizing verbal communication during any year between grades 9 and 12. So that basically came verbatim from the bill. The legislative sponsor also asked us to float a second recommendation, and Jennifer Thronson.
Kathy Gray's here.
Okay, Kathy Gray, if you want to come up there, if you have questions about this, but this was Representative Welton.
Oh, this one. Well,
Yeah.
sorry, I've seen the last bill.
So the change here is that it would eliminate the requirement for the grade 11 ELA credit, and then it would have the same. They could still do the half credit anytime between 9 and 12 for the verbal communication. So, and maybe I'll let Kathy see if she'd add anything to that explanation and there.
Thank you. Kathy Gray, graduation specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. Ms. Rasmussen is completely correct in what he has said. A couple of items is one of the reasons that it would apply to half of the three foundational that's currently in code. The reason that the sponsor wanted it there, well, he did want it there, and the reason that the grade 11 has to be more flexible is because the competencies that are covered are under the applied and advanced courses, which are currently only available to grade 12 at this time. One item of interest that, if it's all right for Naomi Watkins to join us, in case I misspeak in this, is that all right, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is that since ELA 11 is required to take concurrent enrollment English courses, if students are directed to a different pathway or choose a different pathway, that concurrent enrollment might not be available to them. So Naomi, do you have did I explain that correctly, or do you have more you can add?
Unless there's questions, I don't.
Well, let's, I'd have a question, and Ben, maybe I missed it. Lines 22 and 23. And Member Hart, we'll get to you in just a second, if that's okay. 22 and 23. I don't know why. Is there a special thing that I'm missing here? We just took grade 11 1, and then grade 12 1, and then now we say grade 11 and grade 12 2. What's happening there?
So before they were, and maybe Kathy can, or Naomi can help if I don't explain this well, but before grade 11 was a required ELA credit. And so the way this is done, they have to get a language arts credit, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the ELA class. There can now be alternatives. It can be mythology. There's a bunch of speech or debate. There's a bunch of different courses that can apply there instead of just taking grade 11 language arts.
So this is a result of the changes on 34 and 35. And then another question that I had was, did we define what a sponsored activity emphasizing verbal communication, what does that look like? One of the things I brought up in a meeting earlier was my basketball coach emphasized verbal communication, which is a school sponsored activity. I don't imagine the basketball team getting half a credit in English, right, in a high school. So can you help us understand a little bit better? And is it written in here some guidance on what a sponsored activity or class would look like?
May I pass this to the expert in that area?
Please.
Naomi Watkins, secondary ELA specialist. So we work together, Kathy, I, and Robert Austin, the social studies specialist, and speaking happens there hopefully very often as well. And we looked at the English language arts standards that were released recently passed, and there's also speech and debate supplemental standards that were passed in 2019. And we created a synthesis of competencies that would need to be fulfilled or met in that school-sponsored activity. And I believe that's in backup. Is that right, Ben? Can you?
Well, let's see. Oh, yes.
No, it is. And this will just go out with the rule, or this will go out to all?
Yes, to help provide guidance on what would be like verbal communication in that school-sponsored activity. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. So I had member Hart.
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but I just want to be abundantly clear. Are all of the national speech and debate categories included in this rule? Are we inclusive of all of those activities or categories that students can compete in?
Yes.
Okay.
Member Lear.
What would those be?
I can't off the top of my head tell you all the categories, but
I won't hold you to a comprehensive list, but just give me some examples of looking it up myself.
I mean, the speech and debate standards actually are we pulled from for this guidance. I believe they have those there. So, I mean, having a democratic discussion.
But is it like model?
These are
like expository and
yes. Thank you. Yes. Like I cannot think of them off the top of my head right now, but this is broad enough to allow for the various types of verbal communication that exist. Because I mean, Model UN is a little different than a debate course, for example, or a debate club.
And I had one more.
Yeah.
And I had one more question for these experts. I think this is, even though it's a debate coach who's sponsoring this and clearly wanting to generate interest in debate, which, I'm good with that. But I'm just wondering if as English language arts experts, if you feel like this is maybe this is a good idea. You can, I hope you can be honest and say, do you feel like this is is this sort of helping students avoid English language art classes or core competencies, or do you feel like this is a really good extension of that opportunity? Or is that putting you on the spot too much?
Please, if you can.
I can articulate it. Yeah. So there's pros and cons, of course, right, with any decision we make. So pros, there's more choice, right, for students to be able to choose a pathway that corresponds with what they're most interested in. It also honors the competency that comes from something like a debate competition club, right? I mean, those students are performing usually at very high levels in verbal communication. That's the point of that club. On the other hand, we know that we have 47% of students who need some level of remediation in English once they go to a Utah college or university. That's to me, that's a little high. Not even a little high, it's high, yes. And so, English language arts emphasizes all types of communication, verbal, written, reading, and it tends to be that students who go to college need more remediation in that reading and writing communication piece. So that's something that that I do worry about.
Thank you very much for your.
If I can add something, I would just point out, we got some feedback from USSA on that. I think on that a little bit as well. There was some concerns about draft 2 from them as far as the scheduling aspect, just in that it's doing away with grade 11 ELA. There was some concern about how that would look for the teachers and their class loads and how the scheduling, and that may or may not be a board concern. But I would just highlight that they raised that concern that this may create a dramatic shift in how they have to allocate their teachers, because if the students stop taking just the regular ELA and decide to shift to other courses in grade 11.
And Kathy mentioned this, but I do want to reiterate too that English 11 is a prerequisite for concurrent enrollment English courses. So if a student is interested in that pathway of taking concurrent enrollment, they will still have to take English 11, and that's set up by the colleges and universities, not from us.
Member Wood?
So draft 2, is that the preference of the bill sponsor? Is that my understanding?
Yes.
But draft 1 maintains the 11th grade requirement, but still gives them any time between 9 through 12 that they can take half a credit, and whether it be speech and debate or another alternative credit in an ELA field.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd love it to hear a motion.
All right, I move. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Vice Chair.
I would be happy to make that motion. The committee approved R277-700-6 draft. Is it?
It's that's up to the committee. I don't think there's really.
I would like the one.
Yeah, one was the one
One is the staff recommendation. 2 is the recommendation from Representative Welton.
Yeah, I was going to go with draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. And just an aside, as a former debater, I did plenty of writing and listening and reading in debate, not just speaking. So I love how this extends. In fact, the place I learned to write was in debate. So I'm very happy to make this motion and very happy to see this change.
Thank you, Member Hart. So the motion on the floor is that the committee approves R277-700-6, the elementary and secondary school general core. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading a different one. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-700, section 6, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? Let me just ask, the difference between draft 1 and 2, are we going to see any kickback on that? Can I ask staff who've been working on this? There's a reason that draft 2 came out. I like draft 1. Clearly, Member Hart likes draft 1. Member Wood likes draft 1. The other 2 haven't said anything on it, but you know what I mean? Like, what's the difference here? Is it going to cause any kickback to us?
So to take that question, the sponsor prefers draft 2. He would prefer it to count towards a half a credit towards the foundational 3 and expand that grade 11 and open it up to more flexibility. After talking to higher education as well as other determinations, staff is saying that there are repercussions that counselors would need to know about to guide students correctly in a pathway if that grade 11 is opened up to more flexibility. So it is truly up to the committee to make the determination on whether or not that's
something you'd like to move forward with.
No, I was just gonna say you might wanna, you've talked to Representative Welton, I think, more
Yes.
than anybody else.
Well, and I think at times when legislation is drafted, there's an assumption that or implied intent by certain people, but it may not be the plain language of the law. And so I would say that draft one met the plain language of the law. And and we have heard from Representative Welton what his intent was or what he would like. If the board passes draft one, Representative Welton could always bring the bill back and provide additional, more explicit clarity. Also, there's time between now and August to see if we hear feedback from the sponsor. So,
Okay. As individually, would not put this in the motion, but I would ask staff as I throw it out there to just keep us aware if anything does come up so that we can readdress if there are any concerns.
may I make one more comment?
Please.
What I'd be happy to do is share, because so Ben, Jennifer, and I met with Representative Welton, and we had not heard feedback on draft two, obviously, because the meeting we had with them was before draft two was drafted. So what we could do is circle back with Representative Welton, share with him the feedback we've received from various stakeholders, share with him this conversation. In fact, I told Representative Welton that I would send him a link to today's recording so he could listen to this conversation, and then we can touch base with him between now and August and see what his thoughts are. Because we definitely, Ben and I, didn't have the feedback that our subject matter experts have. And some of that was new to me, and we can share some of the feedback that you all have heard today for his knowledge as well.
Thank you. Member Hart?
Yeah, the thing that gets it for me is the concern of higher ed and the concern that it would add responsibility to the high school counselors to really guide the course taking path of students. That to me, I definitely want to honor the work that and the thoughts of Representative Welton, as he is a teacher and is in the space. But that's why I would like to start with one. And then if we need to amend it in August at the full board meeting, we can do it there. But I think one is the better, more prudent place to start.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-700 Section 6, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Member Wood has a comment?
No, I just left it on to vote because I did have one, but she said
covered,
everything. That exactly those two things were my main concern: the counselor issue, and also I think I have a son going into his senior year. That foundational English is critical for them to be successful in college, and I think that the 3 years but this still gives them a flexibility to participate and get credit for that.
Okay. I'll read it one last time. Well, maybe one last time. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-700 Section 6, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Committee, or all in favor, please, or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, passes unanimously.
Chair, can I ask a question? I don't want you to have to reread the motion again, so I saved it.
Okay.
This is just an aside question to a member of our staff. If speech and debate then is a possible activity that counts towards credit, then speech and debate extracurricular now becomes curricular, even if it's after school hours for fee purposes, correct?
Co-curricular, yes. I believe it would.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Agenda item 1.6, R277-303, educator preparation programs. And Ben is going to cue us up here.
So what the amendment to this rule is doing is adding a new education preparation program standards set of standards to R277303. Lisa McLaughlin is the staff on this, and she has a short presentation for the committee to talk about what the impetus was for these changes and what the hope is.
This on? Okay. Hi, I'm Lisa McLaughlin. I'm the Educator Preparation Coordinator here at the State Board of Education. And we have, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. In state code, it says in 53E-6-302, it says the state board shall establish standards that meet or exceed generally recognized national standards for the preparation of educators. And the Department of Education has not adopted national standards for educator preparation, but there are several national accrediting entities that have established standards for program accreditation. And up until recently, all of the educator prep programs in Utah were university-based and were required to be accredited. And that's how we met this requirement in state code. Let's go to the next slide. But recently, we've had some changes to our licensing structure and also the definition of an EPP. So there was a change in rule that removed the accreditation requirement for EPPs. Instead of being accredited, they're now required to be approved by the superintendent. And then the definition of an educator prep program expanded to include programs developed by or associated with an institution of higher ed, individual LEA, a consortium of LEAs, or the board. This would include our Apple programs or any other alternative prep program. And then changes to Utah's licensing structure to accommodate a competency-based approach to educator preparation has created a need for us to establish Utah educator preparation program standards. There's been some question about what does Utah value in educator preparation. The USPE staff is required to approve and review programs every few years. And so what are we looking for when we review those programs? The feedback that we got from the field is that it was important that we have standards that apply to all programs. And so that's what prompted us to develop these standards. And let's go to the next slide.
Can we take a question?
Sure.
When you say apply to all programs in the field, are you referring, what does that mean?
So it would refer, may I answer?
Yeah, please.
It would refer to both university and alternative. It would also refer to teacher prep programs, school leadership, school counseling. Those all fall under that definition of educator prep program.
Okay, thank you.
So we met with a committee of key stakeholders. There were about 12 to 13 that we met with regularly. They consisted of Apple directors and university faculty members to create a first draft of standards. And those were used as a guideline to a discussion about what does Utah value in educator preparation and what do we believe is important to support these educators as they're earning their educator license. And then we shared that first draft with all of our Apple directors during their monthly Apple directors meeting and university faculty and deans during their monthly meeting. Based upon feedback from all of those stakeholders, we did some revisions. And then we released the draft for public comment. There was a 30-day public comment period. We received 87 responses from public comment, and then we went back and did additional revisions. And that version is what is currently in board rule today. So I'm available for questions if you have any additional.
Thank you. Member Wood.
How does this rule then apply to the 53G 11507, where it talks about very specific evaluator programs that have to be put in? Do they complement each other? Will there be dual pathways that the evaluation takes place?
Please.
Or maybe that's an uninformed question, but
I think I don't. She's looking up that rule because I'm not familiar with that one. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh, so this is programs, so you're simply evaluating programs versus educators. Okay,
Yes,
sorry for
yes.
that's why after I asked, I'm like, wait, I think I might be.
Good question.
Thank you.
Can you speak to, there was, excuse me, there was some, a couple of comments that were delivered during public comment, the public comment portion on line 63 in particular, if I wrote these down correctly. One of the concerns that Joylyn brought up was that it talked about offering multiple opportunities, and she had suggested including the language as needed. Is that, can I just do a chair's prerogative and just shout to the panel? Is that correct? Or you're, oh, no. It's 3:03, I thought. Anyway, can you talk to the multiple opportunities? Does that create, what does that do to these programs? Does that say, okay, you have to have these different offerings, and can you speak to that for us?
Yes. The term multiple opportunities comes from the definition that's already in board rule under clinical experiences, where it says that they will have multiple opportunities to demonstrate competency within that experience.
Okay.
And so we were trying to keep that aligned with what's currently in board rule.
Okay. And then I know it's in the definition section, but it does say under mentor means an educator with a professional license with training to advise, coach, consult, and guide the development of a new educator. Does that just mean that the mentor has been around long enough that they should have the skills that they can train somebody? They don't have to go through a formal training. Is that correct?
Part of and this also comes from the definition of a mentor that's in R277308, is that definition comes directly from that board rule, is that part of the requirements of being a mentor is that they do have a professional license and they have experience of being a highly qualified teacher or educator, depending on what position they're serving in. But then they would need additional training on, say, adult learning theory and how to teach other individuals how to do what it is that they do. So that assumption is that training would come either from USBE or the program. Right now, they are allowed to develop their own trainings and use that within their program. USB has also provided trainings that they could use if they want to use those.
When you say right now, is that changing in the near future?
I don't believe so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure. Like, yeah, for the next month they can do it on their own.
Is our educator development specialist. She's here if she wants to talk to that.
If she does, she's looking at me. Okay. We just want to make sure that all this, I mean, a lot of teachers, and I believe this is a growing thing. This educator prep program is a growing thing. So we want to make sure it's done right. So, hi.
Hi, Cami Dupre, Educator Development Specialist here at the State Board. Lisa's accurate. The R277308 merely states that mentors have to be trained. It does not go into detail as to what that looks like, who's providing that training. So at the moment, there are several LEAs who provide their own training to their mentors that fits within their scope of what they want mentoring to look like. But over the course of the last 2 years, we've been hard at work at also developing a series of professional learning modules that many of our LEAs have begun using to prepare their mentors for that work as well. So it's kind of probably a split as to who's using what.
That's helpful. But so the LEA can train their own mentor and say, yes, you now have mentor status here anyway. And if they were to go from one to another, would they still carry that?
Perhaps.
Or would that be up to the LEA to say, actually, we're going to retrain you according to what we want?
The USB has released, last May, we released an teacher mentor endorsement. Right now, that's just a value add endorsement. There's no additional funding or anything that's tied to that.
Okay.
So we have about 100 educators since last May that have earned that endorsement. And that would then be something that they would have a credential to go anywhere in the state and say, I have this endorsement. But if an LEA is training their mentor internally, that doesn't preempt another LEA from requiring them to do different training or additional training.
Okay. Member Lear?
Yeah, sometimes I think rules obscure stuff. And I'm wondering if this is the case. Is this the attempt in rule to balance sort of credible training for various kinds of preparation programs with multiple or many opportunities for educators in the pipeline to show competency? Is that what you're saying? This is instead of just saying we've been told we need to have broader opportunities, and you guys knowing, wait, so we're not doing a great job sometimes in training teachers, so let's come up with some language that tries to say both. So that's what you're really getting at.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then finally, for me, just I want to make sure that we're clear on lines 70 and 71. And it says a program prioritizes capacity to support candidates as reflected in staffing and institutional resources. So are you just saying that a program, well, instead of telling you what you're saying, can you tell me what you're saying?
This was feedback that we received from the committee, that there were some concerns with some programs, particularly from smaller LEAs, not having the capacity to be able to support educators. I know one particular LEA that has an Apple program has prioritized that capacity by saying we only have so many mentors, and so we're only going to accept so many candidates based on those mentors. So that could be an example of how that program has prioritized capacity.
Okay.
But we're kind of leaving it open so that the program can make those decisions.
So you're not putting a cap on, you can have 50 candidates in one class or it has to be 20 or you are saying be aware of your resources before you take on more than you can chew.
Some of our universities have even looked at that. They kind of look at that as a way to kind of petition their deans and say, we need more resources. And so that universities are also concerned with that.
Okay. Member Wood?
Can you think of any specific examples where passing this rule will amend certain programs that we have in place to make them better? Are there specific things where you're like, yes, this rule will help? I've talked to a couple of teachers who've gone through certain programs in the state that they came out, they're brand new teachers in their first 3 years, and they said, we were not prepared through this specific program. Can you think of any examples that you're like, this is going to make a big difference for our educator preparation programs?
I can't think of any specific examples, but I know that when we talk about program approval and review, we're always looking at continuous improvement practices. And so this will be the first time that Utah has had standards for educator prep program that are specifically Utah standards. And so it'll be a good opportunity to start those conversations and say, now that we've established what it is that we value in educator preparation programs, how can we help your program meet these standards if they're not currently meeting them? And what can we do to help our candidates in these programs?
So it really starts another conversation that hasn't been able.
I can speak to that as one who first stepped into the classroom. Nothing can prepare you. Yeah, I don't know if you have some magic program. I'd like to be a part of it. Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, just building off the public comment in regards to line 46 and 47, I interpreted the comment to mean that the language is so vague as to permit everything or permit nothing. Could you explain to me the difference between advise and guide?
I know that we have mentor competencies, and Cami might be best to speak to those.
Yeah, we've identified 6 roles that a mentor serves.
I guess my question is, what is the difference between advise and guide?
I don't know that there's a clearly articulated difference in the 2 words
If there's not an articulated difference, because it doesn't say or, it says and. So if we're saying you have to advise, you have to coach, you have to consult, and you have to guide, I would imagine that each one of those is a term of art, right? Because Deputy Stallings would say, we always want less, not more. And if they all mean the same thing, why would we include those redundant words there? With USB, may I ask another question?
Please.
With USBE training that we offer, does it break those down that we're this section of our USBE mentor training? This is the part where we teach you to advise. And is there another section that says this is where we teach you how to coach, how to consult, and how to guide?
So if I may, I would just point out that they took this definition from another rule. So R277-308 that I put on the screen is our new educator induction and mentoring rule. And that's the definition that the board had previously adopted. And I don't know if you can provide any more context to where that definition came from or why the particular distinction there, but I think we're trying to keep the definition R277-303 consistent with what the board has adopted in R277-308.
And I can appreciate the consistency, but I certainly don't want to be in the position where we're being consistent with something that makes no. So what I'm trying to determine is, we're saying that these mentors have to receive training in these areas. I'm trying to see what USBE does with its mentor program to say, this is how we're training you to advise. I'd like to know where that section is, and then I'd like to see this is the section of USBE that's training our mentors how to guide. That in our packets? Is that in our materials we distribute as part of the mentor program?
Tammy?
Yes, Cami Dupre, Educator Development Specialist. Yes, so the definition as proposed in R277-308 predates me, so I don't know the context of that definition or where it exactly came from. When I joined the agency, we made a significant effort to refine what does that mean? What does mentoring look like? So we have identified 6 specific roles with competencies that hit at each of these things, I guess, things that the definition claims that a mentor is doing. In those mentor modules, each module is aligned to one of those roles, or in most of them, they're aligned to more than one role. So in the first module, they're taught about what does it mean to be a mentor? What kind of work should you be doing? What does that role mean? In third module, how do you help a teacher develop a relationship so that you're able to consult with them in a way that's going to maintain confidentiality between you and the educator? Module number 6, here's where we're going to talk about how to coach and go through the coaching cycle. So yes, all of those things are hit in different elements of those training modules.
And your part of your responsibility is the maintenance and upkeep of those modules?
Yes.
And so in that capacity, what is the definition and difference between advise and guide?
I would argue that there's nothing that we've refined those terms to mean these 6 independent roles. And it's those 6 roles that guide all of the work that we're doing with mentoring. And that those roles encompass those actions, but there's not a single action. One act, you can advise as a facilitator, that's one of our roles, but you can also advise as a colleague, and that's a different role. So there's different roles, and advising in those different roles looks different.
I guess this bears out the point of the public comment, which is it's so vague. I mean, I don't understand the definition that was just provided. If there's any difference between advise and guide, consult and coach, but yet we're going to tell these entities, these programs, you're expected to know what that means.
I would add that what she's describing is also on the webpage with the competencies where they're outlining what those different roles are. It's on the educator development webpage where it talks about mentor competencies.
And I'm sure it is, but I'm not talking about competencies. I'm talking about what is the definition of these particular words. And it doesn't seem like there is a big difference, if any.
So let me, I guess, ask, I see your point here. I see what you're asking. I don't know if we're going to get to this now. Is there a motion that you're that you have in mind, Vice
Yeah.
Chair Carey, or is there some other direction that we can go here? What are your thoughts? While you're thinking about that, is that okay if I
Yeah, please.
go to
Thank you.
Member Wood?
Well, I'm looking at some of the documentation on competencies of a quality mentor. And a quality mentor supports, and then it goes through how they support, guides, understanding of the core standards, provides direction, advises the beginning teacher in implementing structures. I would hesitate in changing a definition that's being used and is in many of our districts' information that they provide to create these quality mentors. These words are being used. And as you can see this, and it goes through, it advocates for the new educator. It anyway, assists in structuring an inclusive classroom, coaches the beginning teacher in strategies that ensure, like, the words are all used with actions that align with those words in the documentation that's out there. This is Jordan School District that I'm looking at, but also through the USBE Quality Mentor. So I would.
And in my own experience, I mean, I can see where you would advise somebody, right, and offer feedback in a conversation, whereas guide would be, hey, try this, try that, right?
Well, I understand the distinction of the words, but this isn't saying, can you identify the distinction? It's saying you have to provide specific training on to someone on how to advise and how to guide, right? It says license
Right.
with training. So my question is, what training does USB offer our mentors specifically to advise? What training does USB offer to specifically say, this is what we do to guide?
Right.
And if I've missed it, but I have not heard that distinction.
Okay.
And my concern is when this goes out to the programs, they're going to look and say, well, are we offering training to advise and guide? What does that look like? And that's what I'm struggling. But I appreciate, I understand
Yeah.
the distinction between advise and.
Well, that's
At
what
least I
you were
thought I did.
saying. What are the differences? And so I was like, well, okay.
Yeah, but
Maybe Joe doesn't know.
Which is about 50-50. So, but it does go to the training, which is what kind of training. And what I was hoping for is that there'd be a bullet list and say, oh yeah, when our mentors come in, this is how we train them to advise. Boom, boom, boom. This is how we train them to guide. Boom, boom, boom. It's how we train them to coach, how to consult. But I have not.
So you want, I don't know if it's separate from this rule. It's obviously tied to it, but it's not here. You want to look at the training, right? I'm trying to distinguish what we're looking at here.
I
if
just
you
don't
wanna
think it's
understand-
fair to ask these programs to train their mentors to advise, coach, consult, and guide if we don't have a definition of what that is. So the motion I'm thinking of is just say mentor means an educator with a professional license with training to guide the development of a new director. Why do we need advise, coach, consult if we don't even outline what that really looks like? And sometimes I think, we just apply the rule of three, which is instead of one word, let's put all these words in.
So, and we're hearing that the reason that this mentor definition is in there is because that's how it's been defined. Not to say it's that you guys did it personally, but that's just what, in order to keep consistency. So, not speaking for or against what Vice Chair Carey is saying, the reason it's in here as is because that's how it is and that's how it's always been. So the question then is that's being challenged is why, and would it even, if we took this right here, an educator with you have to restate it. You have to restate it, Vice Chair Carey, but ultimately removing these four words, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd like to hear, I know that, I'm sorry, I don't know your.
Dr. Height.
Dr. Height. So, but I do want to hear from Dr. Height, but at least now I'm inclined to say if no one can say this is the training, which is how we develop mentors to learn how to advise, here's the training USBE provides to teach them how to coach. Why have all those words in it? Because I think, you're going to have programs that look at this and say, well, what's the difference in our training between advising someone and teaching them how to advise and teaching them how to guide? It seems like we can't answer that.
Dr. Height.
As Malia Height, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. I think that this falls straight into the court of local control, which is why many things that we write and that the board writes is vague, is because we want the individual programs to determine how do they define guide? How do they define it? And as long as they're providing a training of their mentors who are mentoring these new teacher candidates, then they're meeting the board rule. We have, through Cammie's excellent expertise, provided stellar modules to provide a high level of training for mentors that some mentors have engaged in the last year. But it really is about each program has a different way of saying, we want them to have a professional license. We want them to be able to build relationships with these teacher candidates. And we want them to be able to help these people refine their practices and become better teachers. And so it really is does the board want to really explicitly say, this is what we require of a mentor? Or do we want to say, we want you to be able to train your mentors to provide the support to new teacher candidates that will help them to give them the best support and best chance of being successful once they're in the field by themselves?
May I?
Please.
My only question with that response is, and I appreciate the flexibility to LEAs, or programs, but we also offer the training, the mentor training. And we use that flexibility apparently to say we're training them how to advise, coach, consult, and guide. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so when we do that, what type of training do we provide to teach our up and coming mentors? This is the training you're receiving so you can advise better. Mm-hmm. This is the specific training we're giving you so you can coach better. Mm-hmm. And plus it says, and, which I think implies they're forced to do all of them. So I'm not sure if that's flexibility at all.
They should, the and for me says they should be able to when they walk away from this training, they should have the skills to do all of these things. Can I ask any of you, can we hold on one second? Member Hart, we see you.
And me too.
And remember there, can we get, again, Vice Chair Carey is asking about the training. Can we don't have time to look over it right now.
Said there are modules is what they said.
Right. Can we get that to Vice Chair Carey? And then maybe if this does go before the board, or if there's no action on it, regardless, there will be time for committee members to look at it and say, oh, this is what it touches on. This is maybe after we read the modules, we will have the ability to advise, coach, consult, and guide, right?
Yeah, that's certainly available, and we're happy to forward those to you. And I think that just as we do with many other model policies that we provide as guidance for LEAs, that those modules that have been developed are model training that LEAs may choose to use or try and adapt for their own personal contexts.
What I'm really interested in is the materials we use as USBE
right.
in our program to train. I know Superintendent Dixon spoke highly of it yesterday in our Thursday meeting. I love the program. I'm just concerned about the ambiguity we're pushing out to these programs, and we say, you have to do these 4 things, and we can't tell them what that really looks like. Like if I took the advise module, how does that look different than the coach module? And I don't think there is a distinction.
Go ahead.
If I could provide, I try to provide, I guess, some clarity. You can modify this definition and it won't operationally change anything that we're doing, because what we've done is taken this broad definition and attempted to provide concrete ways and things that mentors do as part of that work. And what we've built everything around are those more concrete roles and responsibilities that get at these things. So if the issue is simply that the language in the definition is problematic, I don't see that there's any issue changing the definition, because what we've tried to do is provide the clarity that isn't in this 2-line definition to help LEAs understand this is what mentoring is and this is what a mentor does.
And
Let's,
if I may, I'm ready to make a motion after the.
Can we, okay, so let's hear from Member Hart and then Member Lear, and then we'll circle back to Vice Chair Carey. Unmute for us.
Thank you. I was going to say, let's get that motion up on so that we know what we're talking about. Second, what? Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, Vice Chair Carey is going to work on putting together the motion for us to look at.
And I think I really think that there's a variety of ways this training is I think, isn't there also a micro-credential either being developed or already developed? That
right.
There are several micro-credentials available.
Yeah, and so I understand what Member Carey is saying, but I think once that training is shared, you can see it is very different when you are working with a new teacher. There are times you give them boots on the ground advice. Go do this, then do this, then do this. There's a different tone when you say, here are your options. I'm advising you of your options. It's also different when you're coaching and you do motivational coaching and you ask, well, what are you trying to achieve? And you walk through a conversation with a teacher. I think there are differences in these words, but it's not going to ever be a rubric that says, okay, they've done the advising part. They've done the, and it's, I think in order to clarify, one, we need to have the actual motion, and two, we need to see the training because it becomes very clear. It's just too long of a, I think, I'm sorry, Cammie, I don't, Ms. Dupre, I don't remember your exact title, but I think she hit the nail on the head. It's really just too hard to put in a 2-line definition. I don't think we need to belabor the point. I think showing the materials and considering maybe either more specific language or going more broadly. I think I understand there's 2 different points here. We can go in either direction. I think it's important to see the materials in order for it to make sense. I also know that it's very contextually based when you're working with a new teacher. You can't script it. It's not a checklist or a rubric. So I think we just need to see the motion and perhaps make a decision and move on.
Thank you, Member Hart. I appreciate that. I agree. I think that if we could see the training, then we would understand. And I would agree as well. It's difficult to say, okay, this will help you advise this. But after the training, I think that candidates are confident coming out saying, yeah, I'm comfortable doing these things. Member Lear.
And I liked several comments that were made. It was very helpful for me to hear from Cammie that she said, or maybe it was Molly who said, there's not a rubric. This is advising, this is coaching, this is guiding, but that rather the modules come together to inform the people that are being trained. I came from the experience of not having a moment of mentoring or a moment of training, just bring your personality to the classroom on the first day of school. And that was pretty unsettling. As kind of Matt said earlier, it gave me a little PTSD. There's no preparation, but there wasn't even an attempt when I started. So I appreciate this. I also think that what I hear underneath Mr. Carey's question is look at the modules and then you'll better understand advise, coach, consult, guide. I also agree that those words may not also all be necessary, but I do see some differences. Coaching is more active in my mind. Guiding is more subtle. Consulting is more the person being trained, bringing that to the mentor. So I think all of those are important, but I don't expect a rubric. So I don't, and then the final comment is, Cami also made an excellent point when she said, change the words if you want, but our practice will stay the same with our modules. And that's, so I think if you care about what those words say, you should look at the modules and see if they distinguish them for you. But he's already working on motion, so.
Vice Chair Carey, we're back to you.
If I could make a motion, Chair.
Please.
And the motion would be that the committee amend the definition of mentor to be an educator with a professional license with training that may include how to advise, coach, consult, and guide the development of a new educator. And I like, if I could speak to the motion.
Please.
I think in this way, we keep those concepts there because I agree that there is a difference between those words, right? Those are terms of art. But I think at the same time, it alleviates the angst, the anxiety that these programs may feel when they're like, well, what are those differences? How do we know what the difference is between advise and guide? And so I think this incorporates the best of both worlds. And if there's no discussion, I would just like to call the question.
I do have to ask a question to staff, just a logistical, what does this do? Because this is a borrowed definition. So are we attempting to change USBE definition overall? Because it affects more than just this rule, from what I understand.
Well, the challenge would be that for our alternative preparation programs, our Apple programs, those are practicing teachers who are on a pathway to earn their professional license, and they would have mentors that have to meet two different definitions of a mentor. But I don't think substantively it's that impactful. But 308, where we borrowed the definition, governs mentors of new teachers who are practicing in their first 3 years, and this governs educator preparation who are on their path to becoming professionally licensed teachers.
If I may, I think substantively, I think these definitions are still going to be the same.
Yeah,
so it's
I
not going
agree.
to have a big effect. And the next time we revisit 308, we could bring them.
Why don't
we
you
could
take
bring
it
them
out and
back
put it in
into.
the rule definitions?
That's something that we could consider in the future as well.
Superintendent.
Yeah, thank you. I've been trying to toggle between 3 meetings, which is awesome. So I
You're
was
doing
listening
great.
to this discussion because this is actually my background, and there is a continuum of mentorship to coaching, and all of those words are along that continuum. And one of the challenges for coaches, mentors, principals is and I will say evaluators, when you're evaluating somebody, you have to be clear with the person you're working with what you're doing. So I'm so proud of our modules. I truly am, because they get at all of this. I don't know that may really changes, to your point, Dr. Haidt, the nature of the work, but I think it's an important distinction, because if your sole role is to be a mentor in a school in that provisional period, you don't need to be trained to be an instructional coach. You might have an instructional coach that you go to help with reading, but you need to know how to mentor a teacher appropriately, instead of some dope like me getting tapped to mentor Carol Lear, first-time teacher, when I teach math and she teaches English. We just happen to be next door to each other. That's what we're trying to avoid, are the very poor practices of mentoring that have gone on in this state and in this country for far too long. So I'm super proud of staff for getting out ahead of it and for working with higher ed and helping them understand that there are these different roles, and it's critical that you know how to engage in these different roles, and you don't try to coach when you should be consulting, or you don't try to evaluate when in the moment you should be mentoring. So that continuum is important, and all of those components are important, but I'm not sure that every role needs all of that for training, which is why we have those 10 modules that then can be assigned according to the role. So forgive me, staff, if I'm speaking out of turn, but I actually think that may can help with some flexibility that you've already built in. So you can yell at me later if I've gone astray.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So there's a motion on the floor. Member Lear, did you have a?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I just
Okay.
left.
The motion before the committee is that the committee amend the definition of mentor on lines 46 and 47 to be an educator with a professional license with training that may include how to advise, coach, consult, and guide the development of a new educator. Member Lear, discussion of the motion.
I just want to say briefly, I will vote for this mostly because, not mostly, because the staff says it doesn't change their practice. And I really respect these people and their expertise. I'm a teacher, I've been a teacher for 40 years. I have my own little micro assignment right now to work in a church setting, helping young people know how to teach. But I know that my skills are limited. So I support this because they say that it's essentially operationally the same as the language we have.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion is that the committee amend the definition of mentor on lines 46 and 47 to be an educator with a professional license with training that may include how to advise, coach, consult, and guide the development of a new educator. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. We didn't have an underlying. I just don't know if we ever had an underlying motion. For me to
Good
make.
point, good point.
Member Hart, please.
I move that the committee approve R277303 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-303 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Vice Chair Carey, discussion of that motion?
No.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. On to our next, thank you, staff.
I do have another motion on this particular rule.
Yeah. Did you have another amendment?
Let's do another amendment. Yeah.
But we just passed it through. I don't know how to do that.
Just call it back, but I need 2/3. Is that the, we went through this yesterday, didn't we? I would like,
Motion that we reconsider our actions. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care. I just don't know what the procedure is if we have to.
Motion to reconsider your actions.
yeah, just like man, I wish I could do that in real life. I want to do a motion to reconsider my actions or the last vote. Yeah.
On R2773.
I mean, you don't have to follow Robert's
Okay.
rules super
Yeah.
formally in committee. I think if he wants to make a motion to amend, committee can vote on it and then you can read.
Okay, so the motion is to bring the rule back. This is rule R277-303. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any opposed? Okay, it's back.
Okay, and I appreciate the committee's patience. The other issue I would like to address, which was raised in public comment, was line 63.
And this is referring to the offering multiple opportunities.
Yeah, and if I understood the concern, it was that if a candidate demonstrated proficiency at their first competency, at the first opportunity to demonstrate competency, do they have to keep coming back to re-demonstrate it because of the word multiple? When I first read this, I just thought it meant, what do you call that in healthcare when you have that open enrollment period?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That here's an open enrollment period, and here's another one. You just can't have one that they have to meet. So that's really my question.
Looks like Dr. Height is.
Yeah, so I actually spoke with Joylyn Lincoln about this exact clause. With the word offering multiple opportunities, it means that it needs to be available if the candidate needs multiple opportunities. If the candidate slams it out of the park the first time because they've been teaching for 10 years, but now are seeking their professional license, then great, way to go. You get a gold star, awesome. But really the intent is to help all of our programs, including university programs who are taking people who have never been in a classroom to help them have multiple opportunities to demonstrate that competency. And Joylyn seems she's fine now after we had our conversation.
So there was a request earlier to add the language as needed to this particular. That's still, I would like it because I do think it offers clarity that just like the rule we started our session with this, if I can go back to that script. Yeah, like it says here, shall make rules, not rule, but rules plural. And I thought, wow, does that mean we have to create multiple rules or just one rule? And then, but you thankfully resolved that before we got there. But I'm thinking the same thing here because it says multiple. Does that create confusion that people think it says multiple, so we should do multiple? I think adding as needed would clarify it. So if we just, there's just one other section after this one I'd like to address, but here for 64, I would just like to add, demonstrate that the candidate has the knowledge and skills to serve all students as needed. And I think that way it's more clear that somebody does pass that proficiency, that competency, they don't have to go back and do it again.
Is the as needed, I'm going to ask staff, is the as needed, would that be appropriately placed at the end of that sentence? As I read it, I'd put offering multiple opportunities.
I would put it
as
after
needed.
multiple opportunities. Yeah.
Will you look at that?
That's
Vice Chair?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd accept that. That's fine.
And does that do anything to the rule other than for those who don't work with this regularly? It offers clarity. It offers clarity for me, but you guys are on a level that we're not, right? You see things, you have the context, the understanding. And so does that change your intent at all? Okay.
And then the last one, and I may not make a motion because I think when Chair Hymas addressed this, I believe I understood it, but for 70 and 71.
We want to vote on that motion first.
Well,
a motion, yeah.
Oh, let me just ask this because that might be the only point.
Okay.
So when it says prioritizes capacities for candidates as reflected in staffing and institutional resources, what does that mean?
It's going to be determined by their program. So we're kind of leaving it vague so that the program can offer some suggestions and solutions for that. Because this standard needs to incorporate a variety of programs from a variety of situations, from universities to alternatives to local LEAs. That's going to look different depending on what program we're talking about. So, it could involve hiring a staff member. It could buying a new computer software program. It could be petitioning the provost for additional funds. So it's going to be left up to the program to decide.
And if I may, Chair, that was my next question, which was, but those decisions are made by the program. And I don't think you could be any more clear. It does say a program prioritizes capacity. So I don't have any changes in regards to that. So the only.
Or you're clear on that?
Yeah.
You understand that?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
So we're looking at an amendment on possibly 63, line 63?
Yeah, and that the wording is fine. The motion would be to add as needed after multiple opportunities on line 63. And I would do that just for clarity and clarification.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor that the committee add as needed after multiple opportunities on line 63. Seeing no discussion.
I have just one comment.
Yep, member Lear.
And I promise short. I'm fine with this. I just don't want to dilute this to the point that it is a mentorship is what we say it is. Because teachers need this. We know we've got students struggling in certain areas. And that reflects on the teachers and their preparation. So if we continue to dilute this and make it whatever some preparation program says it is, and we just then we're not going to have the preparation for teachers to prepare the students who we know as I think it was Naomi pointed out, 47% of our students are not prepared for college level English. And that goes all the way up the food chain.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm okay if that's needed, but there's a point that I'm going to say, no, we're not doing our jobs. We have very few jobs, and one of them is teacher preparation programs. So,
I share,
like I
Carrie.
said, I'll go along with it, but I'm concerned about dilution of important responsibilities.
Thank you, Member Lear.
I just think that this change does the opposite. I think what this allows these programs to have the flexibility to say, if you have an all-star that hits it out of the park, let's not lose him or her because we're going to require them to go back and do something else to prove proficiency. So to me, this change does just the opposite. It allows the flexibility to say, you're ready to move on.
The motion before the committee
Yeah.
is that the committee, I know. And I almost said,
There's a space in between.
you can go sit down there. And the motion before the committee is that the committee add as needed after multiple opportunities on line 63. All in favor say aye. Aye. And that passes unanimously. So now we discussed it. So we're back to a motion that I don't know if we have to remake it. I'll make it right now. There's a motion on this that I'm putting on the floor that says the committee approves R277-303 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye, that passes unanimously. Okay, we are moving to agenda item 1.7, R277-330, Utah Effective Educator Standards. This is queued up by Ben. Can I just remind the committee, I want to get work done, but we do have scheduled 36 minutes. Ben.
Okay, so we have basically three. Some of these are kind of combined. So the next two items are actually one item in essence. So you may remember that we've been taking the licensing rules and moving them from the 500 numbering system to the 300 numbering. And so that's part of this here. But staff has also been working extensively to update the effective educator standards. So just want to highlight what you're seeing in draft 1 of R277-330. So staff has updated the effective educator standards and the school leadership standards. And then the recommendation is also that the board incorporate by reference standards for a number of other license areas. So that would include like the speech language technician standard, speech language technicians, counselors, school psychologists, social workers, audiologists, speech language pathologists. So we would be incorporating national standards or other board prepared standards as part of the effective educator standards for those different license areas. Staff has been working on the updates on the effective educator standards as well as the effective teacher standards and then the educational leadership standards with stakeholders. Cami Dupre can answer your questions about what that process has looked like, or if you have questions about the changes on the different standards. If you adopt R277-330, the request will then be that you repeal R277-530.
Thank you, Ben. Cami, can you speak to, I agree that, again, referring to public comment, there was some talk about policy compared to procedure. I agree that it's going to be more in a principal's hands or even a superintendent rather than a board's hand to create policies to support teachers, or I don't know if that's a good example, but Um, my question is not great. I'm just wondering the distinction between policy and procedure. Any thoughts on that? And what would that do if it changed to procedure and took it away from the local boards?
As it relates to this particular rule, this rule is actually referenced in the teacher evaluation and educator evaluation rules, which was what we're talking about next. And current procedures have been that the teacher educator evaluation rules require that educators are evaluated based on what was in this rule. And before now, all that's been in this rule are teaching standards and leadership standards. And so you have procedurally currently those who are serving as counselors or school psychologists or those other types of roles who are being evaluated as if they were a teacher. And so the feedback from the field has been, this doesn't make any sense. So the policy here is to put into place that these standards encompass all of those different roles so that the evaluation that's taking place is related to whatever role an educator is serving in.
Okay. And then on lines 90 and 91, an LEA shall develop professional learning experiences and professional learning plans for relicensure using the effective educator standards. Again, that was brought up and saying, why are we not putting this on the teachers for developing this? Is there some thought to that? Why LEAs would do this and not teachers themselves create professional learning plans? Or I guess the LEA is just developing professional learning experiences, but do they need to develop the professional learning plan for relicensure? Or is that, and just help my understanding? I'm missing something. I know I am. I just don't know what.
Yes, I think the intent there is really for, as we move an educator forward in their licensing and we try to get them to in a position where they're able to get relicensure, the opportunities as they're earning those experiences or those points that will apply for their relicensure have to be provided. The LEA needs to provide those opportunities so that teachers have a way to get to the relicense position, and they're not expected to do that all on their own.
And I think that this is also covered, if I just can add to that.
Let me hold on. Member Hart, we see you. I'll get to you right after Ben.
Yeah, I was just gonna add in our rule on license renewal. I think that this is expounded more about how the LEA has to provide those relicensure hours and work with the teacher on those plans.
Okay. So they're not necessarily doing the work of the teacher. They're just providing opportunity for the teacher. Member Hart?
Yeah, I have that same concern. Licensure is the responsibility of the educator, not the LEA. That's fairly consistent, as I understand, across different fields. You have the personal responsibility. It is a departure, and quite frankly, I didn't know that. I understand what it says, but what it says, I don't have teachers turning in professional plans. They collect their hours. They get hours outside of the LEA. They get hours directly from participating in USBE activities. They go to conferences that offer, generally they're put on by USBE, but they don't go through me on those. I don't arrange as an educational leader. So I'm kind of shifting my role here. I don't think that statement, I don't think we want to leave that statement in. I realize it might be in the old policy, but that clearly says that we're responsible for the plans. And that is a departure. We sign off when they collect those hours, when they're doing their relicensure, but we don't create plans. That would be an additional responsibility. A teacher does not turn in their plan per se that I can think of, unless we're referring to something that I'm not aware of or I'm not thinking of.
Superintendent Dixon.
Yeah, thank you for letting me weigh in. You're speaking to my heart with all of these rules today. I hear what you're all saying, and I too, reading those lines, I think it's a bit confusing. I wonder if to me, the LEA's role is to support. They use the standards actually as that second part of the rule is correct, because they use the standards to assess, is this teacher making progress? So the experiences that they develop should be supporting the individual learning plans for the educators. So maybe you could say an LEA shall develop and support, because to your point, Board Member Hart, what if there's a particular conference, workshop, whatever it is, that might be outside of our LEA, but it meets my plan? I would hope the LEA would support that. So an LEA shall, develop and support professional learning experiences to support educator relicensure plans.
And
does that capture what you said?
Is that a
Yeah,
motion you'd like to make?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to amend. I'll wait for you to get there. Well, yeah, whatever Dr. Dixon said. There it is. Okay.
Yeah, that's how we'll vote.
It's my philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's true. At the end of the day, a principal and the LEA, if a teacher does not follow through on their relicensure requirements and they haven't gotten enough hours, we're never asking for the plan to be submitted ahead of time. That's on them if they don't qualify, they don't get their professional. We obviously have the response. I agree. We have the responsibility to offer those experiences. But the way it's worded, I'm afraid reading the letter of the law would create a whole new system. Okay, an LEA shall support.
Well,
to support.
While that's being typed up, can I ask a question? Member Hart, do you mind if I step in?
Please.
It's not to you, it's to Cammie. I want to just address this because I had the same concern on lines 117 and 118 as that motion is being developed, but the creating academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions to support student-centered environments. And I wondered the same thing. How do you measure that? But then I kind of broke it up and I thought, well, the classroom climate, can I create academic conditions to support student-centered environment? Yes, I can create an academic condition, right? Can I create a physical condition to support student-centered environment? Yeah, I can do that. A social condition. Can I create social conditions? And what does that look like? Well, it's a place where people feel comfortable speaking. I'm not saying about what, but a social condition where they're not tied down to a specific thing. This isn't, 1930s Germany, but somewhere where you can create an environment where it is social. And then the same thing for emotional, because I know that these are hot topics. So I, again, broke it down. Can I create an emotional condition to support student-centered environment? Yes, I can. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I can create an environment that supports emotional development of a student. So I don't know, again, I know that was a concern that was brought up in public comment. For me, I was able to look at that and work it out. I don't know how strict staff is or the USBE is on defining what that means for every LEA or every classroom for that matter. But the fact that it can be done, and it probably, as you think about things, it probably should be done. This is what our students need, is a environment for that. It will look different for each teacher, but I can support these two lines in here. So again, I bring that up because it was brought up in public comment. This was a concern of mine as well, but thought through it. Excuse me. And so I just wanted to make that clear. So we're going to circle back to Member Hart, and then Vice Chair Carey has a question or comment.
I wanted to comment on what the chair just said regarding line
117. Is that okay, Member Hart, if we wait for your motion? Go ahead.
And I think we heard it now from Board Member Lear. We heard it from one of the individuals who spoke to us about our 47% of our high school graduates. What was the exact statistic? They need remedial.
They need remedial.
They need remediation in ELA.
That's
I didn't say it perfectly like those guys.
but it's a frightening and sobering, and I don't even want to use the word statistic or number because I think it diminishes the fact that these are students. They're students within our charge. And when I read something like line 117 and 18, to me, what that's saying is, well, we're going to treat academic proficiency the same as physical, social, and emotional. And when we're at a 47% of our graduates going to college need remedial help in English, I don't know what the number is in math. I think that those words need to be changed, where we are creating a student-centered environment which stresses academic proficiency. And it's not even the political charge of some of these words, which I understand, but 47% of the students within our school system that are going on to higher education need help, remedial help in English. I think that is not a red flag. I think that is a sea of red flags that say we have to refocus the classroom climate on creating the emphasis on the academic. And that's not to say these other areas aren't important, but wow, we're a school system with only 47%. So I would be inclined to make a motion if this would be the right time for that.
Let's have Member Hart make her motion first, and then we can come back to that. Just speaking to that, I agree with you that the academics, that's our role. That's our focus. I didn't read this as these were necessarily equal in setting, but that these should be prevalent in a classroom setting. So, but again, each teacher is going to see this differently. So maybe some clarity, we'll see what happens on a motion, but maybe some clarity would help. Member Hart. Oh,
She's muted.
You're muted for us.
Oh, that's because that the committee amend line 91 to read, an LEA shall develop and support professional learning experiences in connection with an educator's relicensure. Well, that we need to change some case there. It's either an educator's relicensure plan or educators' relicensure plans. There you go. In connection with an educator's relicensure plan using the effective educator standards.
Back on here. Okay, thank you, Member Hart. The motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 91 to read, an LEA shall develop and support professional learning experiences in connection with an educator's relicensure plan using the effective educator standards. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion, and that motion would be that lines 117 and 118 be amended to read classroom climate create a student-centered.
All gerunds, so you want
Yeah.
to put that.
Yep.
Demonstrating, creating.
The student-centered climate, which emphasizes academic performance. And if I could speak to the motion.
Let's make sure we have it correct on the screen.
I have,
Yeah, creating.
Chair, I might be able to create some clarification here before this goes, because it may cause problems elsewhere. The specific language on 117 is taken as a condensed version of the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, which this board approved in August of 2022. And within those standards, each of these umbrella, so these are the 5 standards. Each of those standards has 4 elements. And in the elements, each of the elements sort of provides greater context to the standard itself. And so within the classroom climate, that's this broad statement about what's happening within that element. The other standards above that speak directly to the academics, and the elements within that classroom climate standards talk more directly to what is included or what we are talking about with regards to those broad areas. I just mentioned that because changing the language here will cause a conflict with the standards that were passed in terms of what language do we want where is all.
Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I don't think we're changing any standards. Everyone is still permitted to bring in the physical, the social, and the emotional conditions. We aren't changing that at all. What we're saying is that the emphasis is going to be on academic, and maybe the academic landscape has changed since the board approved it in 2022. But I will tell you, I see a sea of red flags when 47% of our graduates need remedial help in English. And do we know what the number is in math?
It's not as high. Remedial numbers aren't as high in math as it is in English.
Okay. So if I don't want to put the superintendent on the spot, but I certainly don't want to create waves in these other areas. I don't look at it as causing a conflict. I look at it and say, no, what we're saying is you can still take all these factors into consideration. The emphasis, though, on this climate classroom needs to be on academics.
I would just request that if that's the case, that staff has clarity on what to do with the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, that from where this language is, like this language is taken from that document.
Okay, we'll hear from Superintendent Dixon, then Member Hart, and then Member Lear.
I'm happy to defer to board members first, sir. I just want to explain why classroom climate is inclusive of those things, but I'm happy to defer to others.
Please, let's hear it.
Okay, so the number one issue for new teachers when they struggle in the classroom is classroom climate. So they might come in knowing their content, but that's where they need the mentoring, the support, and it's creating the conditions in the classroom. And it can be as simple as the way you organize your classroom, the procedures you use, the colors on the walls, the calming effects, the tone that a teacher uses. So all of those things in that physical, social, and emotional conditions, that's all about procedures, setting up classroom, the way that you deal with students acting out. All of those things create that climate in order to get at the academics. So it doesn't de-emphasize academics, but that is the piece that makes or breaks new teachers getting that right. So that condition, I would underscore conditions. That's the emphasis in that climate piece in order for all of that content and academic part to emerge that's in the other standards. So I just want to highlight that for you, sir, because that is the area where new teachers really struggle and need a lot of support. And I wish we could double, triple underscore conditions that then reference back to physical, social, and emotional. That's different than when we're talking about social emotional learning or, some of the things that you mentioned earlier. This is really how you set all that up for conditions to get at the academics.
Wouldn't we want the pole star of that environment to be academic performance? I don't
No
think,
question.
I
You're
don't
right.
think what we're changing diminishes inclusion of the emotional, the social, or the other things that were mentioned in the original. I'm just saying, I think we need to focus climate on academics. And I understand those other things contribute to it, but I think we create the pole star, the North Star as academics.
Then I might suggest, Chair Hymas, if I may, that if you want to amend this, that you might think about where that STEM goes in order to support academic outcomes. Because if you limit those pieces, it may diminish what we're talking about with classroom climate, and then it does take away from that standard. So I think there's nobody here that wouldn't agree with you on the intended outcome of academics. So if you just rephrase that and add a STEM add to the end there in order to improve academic outcomes, then you're accomplishing the same thing, but you're focused on classroom climate, which is essential to get at the academics.
And I hate to disagree with the superintendent, but she did say, I'm eliminating those other things. I respectfully disagree. I think I'm just emphasizing the academic component.
But you're taking out those words.
Absolutely.
All right.
And that's
Member Hart.
I have a sub motion. If you'll go back to the motion, I agree. I agree with both, actually. I think that you have to create conditions in the classroom in order for something else to happen. And those conditions are those 4 pieces. However, you're not teaching those 4 pieces. Those are the things that you are attending to in the environment. Kids, and it is widely proven in many different ways that students will not learn from you if those relationships aren't built. We like to simplify things because it feels easier to say, just focus on teaching the facts or focus on teaching these discrete items that kids need to learn. Well, they just don't learn them if these conditions aren't favorable. So I think it needs both. So I would like to propose that, and now I'm stalling, creating a student-centered climate, including, and then put those 4 things in, which emphasizes, or wait a minute, just get to that point.
With emphasis on.
Yes, an emphasis on, because I do see the other problem that even once teachers are experienced and have those 4 conditions in place, teachers sometimes, we've got so many good ideas that we sometimes don't go for the great, the academically dense, the more time consuming, the harder, the deeper learning that gets us better outcomes. And it happens for a variety of reasons. And one is we have too much in our standards, but that's a different aside. The environment has to be attended to so that we can get as much learning accomplished as we can, but we also need to attend to the density of, and we used to call it rigor, but then everybody just started using the word and now it means nothing. But we do have to attend to that. Yeah. And we do have to attend to that, and both beginning teachers and experience with emphasis on academic performance. Can you go back to the original ones? Can you put up original 117?
So I'm learning that changing the language at any of this changes the standard. So if if I'm hearing and understanding correctly, if we want to make a change in this, which I don't think staff is saying no, but I don't think that this is the place to make the change. Is that what I'm understanding? So if we want to make a change here, we actually need to talk to board leadership and say, we need to review the standards. Is that what we're?
Can I clarify?
Please.
Jennifer Thornton, Director of Teaching and Learning. So this language comes straight from the Utah Effective Teaching Standards that you approved in September of 2022. And therefore, if you change it here, we would have to change the standards. The standards are approved by the full board. So I think it's just something to keep in mind. This is a document that was recently released and recently approved by the board.
Okay.
So if okay, Member Hart, go ahead.
So you're saying that adding with an emphasis on academic achievement would require the standards to come back, then my motion changes to the standards need to come back in front of the board.
Member Lear, sorry.
I don't think I want that right now. But what I'm asking is if you're saying if there's even a rewording of that, you feel like they need to come back to the board?
I think if you're going to reword it here, we just need to update it in the standards document. And if as a committee, if you propose that to the board, they just need to understand the implications of that. So if you want to say with academic achievement, we can update the standards. People just need to realize it doesn't only impact the rule, it will impact the standards.
And I get that, but what I'm asking something a little bit different.
Okay.
Let me try again, try and do better. I'm saying you feel like that has to happen, even if we're just moving words around, but we still keep those words in this version.
I like alignment, I guess. So if you want this language, why wouldn't we want it in the standards, right? Like that's all
And that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is my motion changes so that both come back so that they're aligned. I just don't want to do one without the other.
Okay. So the substitute motion before the committee is that the committee directs staff. Hold on a second. Member Hart, which one are we putting for? There's two.
I think the top one is what we're.
The top one, but I
and
hear
the bottom one. I don't know if we need to make a motion or if that's something that board leadership could do, but you need to recognize that if we are changing this, then we need to consider the other standards. Is that fair?
And you
to
could
say?
make it a combined motion and say we want to update the language in the rule and update the standards. That would be awesome. Because then we just want to keep them parallel, right? We want them to be the same.
And that was my intent.
Okay. So the motion before the committee, if I can get this done correctly, is that the committee amend line 117 to read classroom climate, creating a student-centered climate, including academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions with emphasis on academic performance. Additionally, the committee directs staff to bring the effective teaching standards document.
That would be a separate motion if they approve that.
Okay, it is separate. I don't need to combine.
Okay.
That's what I'm.
One more.
So, hold on, I'm in the middle of this motion here and I don't know what's going on. So, I'm gonna let I'm gonna think about this. Member Lear, go ahead. Get your microphone, please.
When you bring back the standards, I'm just trying to be realistic about board workload and not to mention staff. But when you bring that back, I don't want then all the standards to be back in front of us. So you could bring back just this little piece.
May I recommend how to make this motion so that we just do that without bringing the standards back at all? If you're saying change this line, amend line 117 and the Utah Effective Teaching Standards document to read classroom climate,
We
blah,
can't
blah,
do
blah.
that because we haven't noticed the effective teaching standards document. There's a notice issue there.
Oh,
So we can make, what I'm being told is we can make we can make the first motion and then we can make the second motion to direct staff to bring.
Well,
to amend that line. and only the time. No.
Before it comes to the board, can't we do that just before it? Because we're not only, we're just recommending to the board. We're not taking final action. So
The-
can't that,
The problem is with amending that document is it has to be noticed up if we're going to make a change in committee.
which,
So we can't take an action on that, but they can direct staff to bring that back.
respectfully, I think we could, we can
We could
recommend,
add that to the August board agenda
Yeah,
too, but
we-
we can't take action on it now.
but can't we recommend to the board? Because we're only recommending, we're not taking final action. So I don't see why that has to be noticed when our discussion is related to an item on the agenda.
I don't know.
Is Brian listening here?
Parliamentary books that.
I don't, you know what? I don't care. Once in a while, just say, Carol, stop arguing about this.
And
I'll
can
do
I
it
add
anyway.
something? And I know that this is just an ripe for discussion of what something means. And of course, you've got a lot of attorneys here today. But
We're not all.
there are arguments that OPMA or the Open and Public Meetings Act does not apply to our committees because there's not a quorum. That this committee in and of itself does not have authority to take action that would impact people. Because what this committee does is provide recommendations to the board, to Board Member Lear's point. And so you can make an argument, as Board Member Lear just did, that we could make this directive because ultimately it's a recommendation to the board who is subject, the full board is subject to OPMA because the board has the power. But I would love it if
I think
Brian,
it's two separate motions.
it is two, I agree, it probably should be two separate motions. And then just understanding that likely what we're going to need to do is request board leadership to add an agenda item near the law and licensing report out with the educator standards, like as an item, so that the action could happen close to in time.
Can we narrow it, as Member Lear has mentioned, can we say section, subsection, line,
Lines 2, 3, and 4.
words? Yeah.
We would greatly appreciate, just because they're barely out, people are redoing their evaluation systems to align with those. It's not great timing to come back and revise these again. So if you can limit to amend it to match R277 line 117, awesome. That would be beautiful, and we would want to do that.
So I'm going to put the first motion from Member Hart, first sub motion on the floor, and then Member Wood has some comments. And the motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 117 to read classroom climate, creating a student-centered climate including academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions with emphasis on academic performance. Member Wood.
I'm just wondering the need for this. I mean, the first one is already academic. That's the very first thing in the line. And if you go to the effective teachers create academic, physical, social, and emotional environments to support student-centered learning. Why are we're going to change the effective teacher standards. We're going to change this to emphasize academics when academics is the first thing in the list of things that they need to do to create this. Climate is already described. National definitions of school climate involve these 4 words. So I'm just wondering the need for all of this in the first place.
I do. For me, I appreciate the emphasis on academic. I think sometimes that gets lost depending on the teacher, depending on the individual. So I think an emphasis on that, especially in education, when this is our realm, everything we do is to educate that child, right? I'm a math teacher to teach math, not necessarily to just go in and create an environment, but it's directed towards something. So I appreciate the emphasis on academic performance. I think, again, sometimes that gets lost, but that's just my response to your comment here. Member Lear, you have a light on? Okay, so again, the motion before the committee is that the committee amend line 117 to read classroom climate, creating a student-centered climate including academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions with emphasis on academic performance. All in favor say aye.
Yeah.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, it passes 3-2. We have another motion before the committee, and it is that the committee directs staff
So are we changing this up then to ask the board to vote on it?
To ask the board to vote on these words, or do we need to change them? What do we need to do first? I guess it happens at the same time. I'd leave that in staff's, how to word that then. Member Hart, does this look accurate?
I'm watching. I'm open to whatever. To me, these go hand.
I think this is the end of the motion. If you're happy with it, your name's on it. That's why I'm asking you.
Yes, I move that the committee recommend that the board amend the Utah effective teaching standards consistent with my member Hart's amendment.
Say it again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee recommend that the board amend the Utah effective teaching standards consistent with member Hart's amendment. Discussion to the motion, Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, and I can either make this a substitute motion or a friendly amendment. We have the language. Why don't we, instead of saying consistent with, because I just went through this last month, if we know the language that we want, why not just say consistent with the following or replaced with this language? And that takes the ambiguity out and we have something solid. Member Hart, I'll defer to you on that, but.
I mean, that's fine. I think, well, yeah, you're right. Can we just,
better?
That I do think that's, you can either do that or you can cut and paste. I'm fine with either, but I very much think that's appropriate.
Okay.
And again, this is just because we want that alignment. I get it, and I want to honor that.
So the updated motion is that the committee recommended that the board amend the Utah effective teaching standards consistent with the language from the amended R277-330.
Can I speak to I want to say one thing. And part of the reason that I do this is it is self-serving a little bit. It is so hard. You can go into a classroom. I think it exists a little bit more at the lower grades than it does the upper grades, where the classroom environment is fabulous. It's warm and it's inviting and it creates the conditions for success. But the teachers, sometimes it's easier to design an experience than it is to design a very rich learning experience that pushes students. And yes, I know it's said in the other items. I get that. But sometimes you go in there and it's so hard to say, yes, this is great. And we need to make sure that we're incorporating the science of reading principles, or yes, this is great, but the instructional level of the literature you selected, sometimes it's hard to move teachers to that conversation without it feeling like a deep criticism. And I think that's where we miss so many opportunities to really make it a rich learning experience and not just a rich community. It's got to be a community of learners. And sometimes it's really hard to get teachers over that hurdle. And that I mean, we pour so much money into most recently science of reading. I think we'll probably be coming up on some math. We're trying to do some cross curricular things. I'm particularly interested in writing and making sure those experiences are we used to call it higher order, or higher DOK, depth of knowledge. It's just the more often we can say that the classroom needs this environment in order to do this, we'll be able to push through with some of the things that have kept our success lower than we want it to be. So I completely understand. I just think that extra emphasis gives our educational leaders, our teacher leaders, our coaches, the tools to be able to say yes and. So that's my speaking to the motion.
Thank you, Member Hart. Member Wood.
I have a motion to amend.
Okay, motion to amend.
I'd like that the committee recommend that the board amend the Utah Effective Teacher Standards to say, effective teachers create a student-centered environment, including academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions with emphasis on academic performance by. Effective teachers create a student-centered environment, including academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions with emphasis on academic performance by. I speak to this.
Yeah, please.
So each of the teacher standards start with effective teachers do this, effective teachers do this, effective teachers do this. So this aligns the wording from our motion before, but also aligns with the way the effective teacher draft.
So you're not looking to add this to the rule, but this is the wording you want to go into the standards. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Okay. So she's been working with Dr. Thronson, who is more familiar with the standards than we are, and this verbiage will fit into the standards
It's right here.
appropriately.
So what we're saying is we obviate the need to go.
No, we still go to the board. It's just modifying we're not cutting and pasting from the rule. We're amending it just a little bit so that it fits the formatting of the teaching standards document.
That makes sense. Member Wood has some of it there.
This is this is the way it's laid out, and right, every standard has its own page, and each one has a unique identifier at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's just taking the language, but you wanted to not worry about, you wanted to know what language was coming, so I'm giving you specific.
So before we discuss that, the motion to amend before the committee is that the committee recommend that the board amend the Utah Effective Teaching Standards to read, effective teachers create a student-centered environment, including academic, physical, social, and emotional conditions with emphasis on academic performance by.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Carey.
I would just, I like the change. I love the positivity of the effective teacher approach. I think that is very positive, and I think it effectuates what I wanted to accomplish. But yeah, I support the change.
Okay. Thank you. Without repeating the motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. That passes unanimously. Do we need to do anything else on this agenda
We
item,
still
or
need
is it
to
all
pass
wrapped
the
up?
underlying rule. We've
Okay.
only passed amendments.
Okay. So I'm going to put a motion before the committee, and that is that the committee approve R277-330 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, it passes unanimously.
Yeah, can we do the repeal on 5?
Let's do a repeal. I'm just going to let committee members know where we are at this point. It's obviously after time. It's 12:12. We can do a repeal for the other rule. We do need to get through agenda item 1.9. It is time sensitive. My apologies for not pushing us through the entire agenda. but we'll have 3 that might lapse to another meeting. So
Well, 1.10 and 1.11 are tied in with 1.9.
Appeals because of this.
Well, there's sunsets that are tied in
Okay.
with that, but
we'll keep going.
those will be fast. But
I would rather not go later than 12:30.
What's your stop point?
Can we do 12:30 and we'll just start going, okay? So,
Yeah, and Chair, remember that this afternoon is not a full study session. So it's not going to be long. It's going to be fairly
Right.
brief.
But you are starting once.
we're starting at 1 and we want to
Yeah.
get the committee members time for lunch. So agenda item 1.8, R277-530, Utah Effective Educator Standards repeal. Ben?
just need to repeal this rule, given that you've passed the 3:30.
I'll
Okay,
make a motion to repeal.
please, Member Carey.
Just
77.
read what's highlighted.
That the committee repeal R277-530 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277-530 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, it passes with 4 votes, and Member Woods stepped out for a second. Next agenda item 1.9, R277-323, Public Educator Evaluation. And Ben Rasmussen will cue us up.
Okay, so we are on draft 2, and just want to highlight a few things before we turn it over to questions that you might have for staff. So the first off is that the proposal is this would take effect for the 24-25 school year. So this doesn't take effect immediately, but it would take effect down the road. Staff has been working with a number of stakeholders to update what the evaluation framework looks like. The big change that I think we would want to highlight in presenting this is the definition of summative evaluation rating. This proposal would alter the 1 to 4 scale that districts use to evaluate educators. And I say districts because charter schools are not affected by this rule. The legislature's evaluation statutes do not apply to charter schools, and so this rule would not either. So this would be the new 1 to 4 framework for evaluating teachers, and goes through what the consequences or the implications are for that evaluation framework. And with that, I think staff would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Can I ask, I don't see any lights yet, but can I ask the comment by Jay earlier in public comment referred to maybe not having this done annually? Can I?
That's in statute, isn't it?
Okay, please, Director Thompson.
Yes, so we understand that we would love to ask the board to consider a policy request. Right now, the code requires a summative evaluation every year. We don't have the authority
This
of the
isn't
board
in our
to say
hands.
no.
This is- okay.
So to respond to his need, and I got that email a few times from different stakeholders, I said, I hear you. It's outside of our control right now. So if the board wants to bring a policy request to say, let's have that reconsidered by the legislature, to ask for, a formative assessment every year and a summative evaluation every 3 years, which is what most people do, or some design towards that effect, that would be helpful. Right now, LEAs are out of compliance with code. They are required to do summative evaluations every year on every educator.
So
It's a lot.
yeah, it sounds like it. And you're saying every 3 years is common in
That's
other
what a lot
states?
of LEAs do. Not other states. We haven't actually looked at that, but
We
when they
just- we
did the
just do it.
audit found that people were doing formative, summative in their process. And I don't know if it was probably just due to demand. It was easier, a little lighter lift to say we're doing some evaluation, but it doesn't meet the code standards. So our rule is clarifying that because the audit found that we are out of compliance greatly across the state. And so although it's not that we don't agree as staff or the working group, we don't have that authority at this time to say you don't have to do summative evaluation every year.
So thank you. I guess I would throw it out to the committee, is that, and to staff to help understand, is that something that would be, I don't want to say worthwhile, but you know what I mean? Is this something that we need to go to legislation and say, we need help with this.
A policy request.
Yeah. Do we need to create a policy request? Is this that big of a burden?
It
Molly
seems to
says
be.
yes, but I don't, you know.
From the feedback I've gotten, it is repetitive, redundant, and the same thing over and over.
Okay.
So I would suggest to the board, a recommendation from us would be, let us work on a policy request to bring to you to consider amending this so it's not summative
It
every
was
year.
something I heard a lot on the campaign trail from teachers, that there was this overwhelming department.
And we discussed in our working group, why not say every 5 years, a teacher has to have a summative, and then if they are passing, they do not need to have a summative every year. They're still going to be checked on and monitored. It's only when they're at that level of you need support that you have to be evaluated every year.
So staff would work with legislation if that policy request came on what best practices would look like. So Deputy Stallings has some comments, and then Member Lear has some comments.
So Ben, and you could show, I do have a draft motion that you actually could make that motion today, similar to what, Board Member Davis wanted to do yesterday when we were discussing, I can't remember which rule it was, but this is a common practice when you review a rule that you identify as a committee a need for a legislative change. So we could do one of two approaches. You could make this motion, and then if the board approves it, it gets put on our policy requests list, and we'd reach out to a legislator. Or, as Jennifer mentioned, is another alternative. You could just direct staff to work on a policy request separately and fill out a form and bring that to the board in August. So we can do either way.
Member Lear.
I just wanted to ask, moving off that a little bit, to these changes, are these, I think we had an educator evaluation discussion a couple of years ago that wasn't maybe as fully baked as it should have been. So do you feel like this has been reviewed by those in the field, that HR directors, and it's something that is well accepted and well understood?
May I respond?
Please.
Thank you. Yes, we did a lot of stakeholder engagement along the way. We also talked to lawyers in the LEAs because they deal with it from an employment standpoint, HR directors, UEA has been at the table as well. So at this point, I really feel like we have feedback. USSA, when we reviewed this with them, they had no feedback for the rule, which to me I was taken back. I was expecting some feedback. And so the Superintendent's Association didn't have any refinements that they requested, as I think they understood this is what's required by code. So they didn't bring that up. And the rest of it is they appreciated the changes, and the field has been really responsive with
That's
this.
good enough for me. And with that, I'm willing to make a motion if you're ready.
Please.
You know, put
I have a question.
Microphone. There you go.
Yeah, sorry, you didn't read my mind on that. I forgot to hit the Director Thronson. So when we say we're asking for the board to have authority to establish the evaluation timelines, are we going in with specifics, or are we just saying we want the board to have the authority to do this?
That would be great to have more clarity on. So what we would need direction, because honestly, when you were in session this year, there was a motion made by the board to say, just give the board the authority on evaluation. So kind of like graduation requirements, just say the board has the authority, and then the board creates all the rules. Right now, evaluation is heavily in code. Like every step of it is very directive in code. So that would be a place for this committee or the full board to consider. Do you want to just ask for the authority to be over evaluation, and then you can determine the timelines, everything associated, or do you just want us to go and ask for the timelines to be changed? The way I would have read that was we're asking for the timelines to be changed, but if the board wants the authority over evaluation, that would be a different request in my mind. Or we see what the appetite of the legislative sponsor might be. Here's a couple ways that we might approach this.
I'd like to hear what Board Member Hart and Board Member Wood think about. Does it make sense for us to ask for all the authority? Is there an appetite for that? Or is that a fight we ask and we lose? I'm not sure. But as an educator, someone who deals with this, do you think it makes sense for us to ask for all the authority?
Member Hart, unmute for us,
If I may, Chair,
please.
I think that we asked for it all. And that sounds, so I don't know what it sounds, but the reason is because so many of the pieces interlock, and if you change one, it can affect, I mean, it is so heavy in code. Director Thronson is exactly right. I just worry about piecemeal. Now, if there's no appetite for that, if the sponsor's not comfortable with that, then of course we could always come back from, back off of that request and make a different request. But I think we start with the whole thing because of how entangled it is. But that would be my my thought.
Okay, I think, Member Lear, if you're ready for that motion, if that motion has changed a little bit.
I was gonna make, I'm comfortable with making the motion on this rule.
Okay.
I think I personally, I need to think a little bit more about the USBE having the sole responsibility for evaluation, because I think there's some pieces of it that has served teachers well to have the legislature involved, and especially the changing nature of the board and the fact that it doesn't apply to charter schools. And so I'm not prepared to jump into that quite yet, but I'm very comfortable with making the motion on 323.
Well, let's have, does one need to come before the other? Okay, so Member Lear.
I move that and I can't read that super well, so you might have to correct my language. I move that the committee approve R277-323 draft 2 and recommend to the board for second and final reading.
Draft 2 is in back. Draft 2 is the correct motion.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question to that motion?
Sure. Yep.
Was that the only change made in that rule?
This is a new rule, so it's been completely reimagined with stakeholders. So are you talking about between draft 1 and draft 2, or?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what we did in draft 2. I think
It's okay. It's okay.
That's right. The only change we made in draft 2 was there was a numbering issue in section 6 and 7. We fixed that.
Okay.
189 new is 180.
Yes, and then line 188 and line 189. We expanded the language on when an LEA can provide assistance to an educator, so it wasn't just a level 2 situation.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-323 draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, passes. Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that the committee recommends that the board direct staff to work with a legislator to amend Utah code requirements related to summative and formative evaluation requirements, including potentially removing evaluation requirements from code and giving rulemaking authority to the board.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. And I don't need to emphasize to staff, but to Carol's point, including potentially removing evaluation requirements.
And if I could speak to it, I would love to get the full board's feedback. And I think that's all this does, right? Is push it up the chain, and then we can hear the board and get all that feedback. So with that understanding, I make the motion.
Thank you. Member Wood.
I appreciate this motion, and especially just learning that charter schools are not under the same authority. I know this last session, they talked a lot about more kind of equity in terms of what's required of schools and what's required. So why not take this out of code and allow those of us that have general control and supervision to have general control and supervision?
The motion before the committee is that the committee recommends that the board direct staff to work with the legislature to amend Utah code requirements related to summative and formative evaluation requirements, including potentially removing evaluation requirements from code and giving rulemaking authority to the board. All in favor, say
I
aye.
have a
Oh, Member Lear, sorry.
Just as we vote on this, I am in full support of the first half of this, but I think just for myself and my personal vote, I am not going to be voting. I'm going to vote no, because I'm very concerned and reluctant. Without further discussion, there are some career implications for teachers in evaluations, and that makes me nervous without exploring that more thoroughly with those who represent the majority of teachers.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm not going to restate the motion, but all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Okay, that passes 4-1. With
Can we do
the member
the
there.
next two just real quick? And
Yes. We're at 12:28. We're going to try to get through these next two. Agenda item 1.10, R277-531, public educator evaluation requirements. We can't
So
combine.
if I can just state briefly, 531 and 533 would be sunset after 323. The rule you just passed takes effect in a year. So this just adds a sunset date of June 30th, 2024 to each of those rules. So we just need a quick motion on each of those.
Make the motion.
Go ahead.
That the committee approves Rule 27.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-531 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Chair, with action item 12, I'm happy to defer that and carry that. That is my.
Okay.
We still need one
Yeah. Yep. Well, so
There's
agenda
one more
item.
rule that goes along with that.
I'm happy to defer that.
Okay. Well, agenda item 1.11, R277-533 educator evaluation systems. Ben.
So this is the same thing. We just need to add the sunset date to this rule so that it will sunset in a year when R277-323 takes effect.
Happy to make a motion on that.
Vice Chair Carey.
That the committee approves R277-533 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-533 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. We will defer on our last agenda item. I'll seek one final motion.
Adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.